Mr. Challenger joining us today, first time in person. Welcome, sir. President Otero, you have a full contingent. You have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Moving on in the agenda to the ratification of an appointment.
Certainly, I mentioned that we would be ratifying and inviting Mr. Hanks to join us. The Commissioner of Education, as you know, has 4 appointments, and he has made an adjustment to that, and now Mr. Hanks will be joining us. He comes from Region 4 in the Miami-Dade County area. I'd like to entertain a motion that we ratify his appointment from the Commissioner of Education.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your right hand. I believe it was unanimous.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Welcome aboard, sir.
Welcome, sir. We're happy that you're here. The next item on the agenda is an adoption of the agenda.
I'll make the motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
A motion and a second. Ms. Patrica, discussion?
I'd like to amend the agenda, if I may, to include a couple of items. The first is discussion and consideration of SMAC's COVID-19 Return to Participation Guide and Fall Sports Considerations dated August 11th, 2020. And I'd like that to be item G1. And then as item G2, adoption of option 3 as amended to include SMAC discussion edits, also known as option 3B. For that to be action item G2.
So we have an amendment to include the SMAC considerations in the report to be item G1. Is that correct?
Yes, please.
And then the second amendment that you're requesting is the consideration of option 3B to be, where was that? I'm sorry?
G2.
G2. Do we have a second to that amendment?
Yes.
Mr. Schusterman has seconded that. At this time, is there any other discussion?
I have a question for a matter of protocol, and I'm now looking for our experts on Robert's Rules of Order and order of things here. Would it be appropriate also, I'm asking this question, to, when the action item is on the floor, to at that time amend the action item? Because the action item, as opposed to attempting to amend the action item prior to the beginning of the agenda. Does that make sense?
Well, it's my understanding that these are separate actions from what's already on the action agenda. So in order, the reason why I seek to amend this is because I believe it's important for us to have a discussion regarding the recommendations made by SMAC. And I also think it's important we are a representative democracy. I think it's important for us to have a discussion and lay all of these items on the table for an up or down vote because we represent such a diverse constituency, and so many of our constituents want different things, and these are separate and different actions from what's already on the agenda. That's the advice I got from the attorneys at my district.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Gertis had a question.
Yeah, I just need clarification, and I'm sorry I couldn't hear everything at the beginning of your motion. So you're saying that, for instance, you're saying option 3B would be under G2. Wouldn't G1 already be decided at that point?
And that's why I wanted it to be G2, and that would move item G1 down to G3.
Oh, so you're moving item G1 down to G3.
Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Mr. Finlayson?
I'd like to hear what Mr. Ireland wanted to say.
Thank you. I don't know exactly what the motion is. If there will be discussion on what the amendment is under any item that's on the agenda, then there's no need to amend the agenda. That's in a sentence, I hope. If that doesn't explain my position, I'll be happy to further it. If it's a new item that's not on the agenda, that will not be discussed under any item that's on the agenda, then it's appropriate. If it's an issue that can be discussed on the agenda.
So during the action portion of the meeting, I can make a motion for adoption of option 3B, because that's not on the action.
But I believe you could make an amendment to the motion that's on the floor to include whatever you want it to include. That would be my understanding. The motion is on the floor. Assuming the motion gets a second, then you can make an amendment to include in that motion X, Y, Z. I believe.
But the actions are contrary to each other, so I'm not sure how you can amend an action to be contrary to the action that's on the floor. That's not an amendment, that's a different action and a different action item.
If I'm understanding Ms. Patrica, if that motion passes, then Ms. Patrica does not have an opportunity to discuss an alternative action item, which is in Ms. Patrica's case 3B.
She would have, pardon me, but she would have if she moves to amend the item that's on the agenda, and if there will be discussion on that motion, if there's a second. If there's not a second, then it shouldn't be discussed anyway. But if there is a motion to amend that's seconded, then there will be whatever discussion Ms. Patrica would like to have at that point in time.
Mr. Schusterman?
So what you're saying is we can have a clear discussion on 3B before we vote on the suggested item?
If there's a motion to amend, yes. And I think there will be anyway, but...
Okay. I think that's what's important, is that we're getting a chance to discuss the other options
And I agree.
before a vote is taken.
Mr. Finlayson?
I believe that it's going to be only natural that the contradiction will be a part of the discussion within that. So I think that that's going to allow for that full discussion of the whole issue. Because you're right, it's not a separate issue. It's all really even changing that to item G1 and moving in that. It's all really going to be a part of G1 together, that we're going to have that complete discussion. That's my opinion, but so I'll be glad to be corrected when I'm wrong often.
I mean, I'm happy to do what the body wants to do, but it's my understanding we're supposed to have one item on the table at a time for discussion. And so I'm trying to sort of categorize these things so that we can keep one item on the table at a time for discussion.
So, Mr. Ireland, is there any problem with voting on the amended agenda as presented? And if it passes, then we would proceed with Ms. Patrico's request, and if it doesn't pass, then we would proceed with the agenda unless someone else had a different amendment?
No.
Excuse me?
There's no problem with that.
Okay. Mr. Johns?
Okay, so if we are looking at B, I guess, then aren't we going to create the same issue? That's my concern. I have no problem discussing both sides of the table. I have a problem with moving. Okay, now the issue currently is that the concern is, are we going to vote on option 1 without even discussion option 3B? If you flip-flop it, you're going to be in the same situation. So, I mean, I completely understand we need to discuss both sides of it, but I don't feel like we need to change the agenda to do just the opposite of what we're doing now. So, I mean, we need to find a way, under guidance of Mr. Leonard or Mr. Finlayson, how to be able to do both, talk about both without changing the order, so that now we vote on 3B without ever discussing option 1. So,
All right, so
if that makes sense.
That's a fair point. Why don't I remove my motion from the table and change it to be a motion to amend the agenda to include consideration of the SMAC report as G1, and then Executive Director's recommendation of option 1 and consideration and discussion and potential action on option 3B.
Mr. Finlayson?
Mr. Finlayson, well, first we would need a second on her amendment, would we not?
You
Mr.
gotta read it.
Schusterman. Go ahead, Mr. Finlayson.
So under current G1, we have a recommended action. It may be cleaner to amend the agenda to include discussion of alternatives to that recommendation instead of being specific to just 3B. There may be other things that need to come on the table as well. So to alter the agenda to include alternatives to the recommendation may give us a lot more room to do exactly what we all want to accomplish and discuss the whole picture at once. Again, that's just my opinion.
That would work. And I think it'll do what I think Mr. Patrica wants to do.
I withdraw my motion so that Mr. Finlayson can make one.
Can you,
I'm smiling under here, by the way.
can you repeat that, sir?
Yes. So I would make the motion to amend the agenda for item G1 to discuss the proposal of the executive director as well as alternatives to that proposal during that time.
So in that motion, then, according from Ms. Patrica's original motion, there is not the consideration of the SMAC report prior to discussing these options. Is that correct, in your motion?
That's correct. There are recommendations and proposals, for lack of a better word, within the SMAC report that I think all of that discussion will be a part of. So it makes one singular discussion, which is what we really need to have, rather than trying to discuss this in some semblance of order. So,
And I agree with that, Madam President.
Okay, so we had Mr. Finlayson's motion. Do we have a second on that one? Mr. Johns, Mr. Schusterman both seconded that. Any other discussion?
I'd say, do we have to have the original, do we have to vote on the amendment first, Mr. Ireland? Okay.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
So at this time, we are voting on the amendment to the agenda, which is to move up to G1, the consideration of the executive director's recommendations and also alternative recommendations. Is that correct?
Correct.
All in favor? I believe that's unanimous as well. At this time now, we will vote on the agenda as amended, sorry. Take a motion on that, too. Leonard? All in favor of voting on the amended agenda as presented? Okay, moving along. Now that we got that taken care of. So we are at the point of public comment. We do have two individuals who will be speaking together.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Board members, you all realize and know that we had the opportunity for the public to provide an email to the website, and we forwarded as many of those as we could to you. Today we have who in person that wish to speak to us, Mr. Jamie Kent and Tammy Kent, and they're from Cambridge Christian in Hillsborough County, and they have 2 minutes to address the board. Mr. and Ms. Kent.
Thank you. first is this. We know that sports provides a structure. We know it provides the mental support, the physical support. We know it also, when you don't have those things, some kids really struggle. When you have these structures in place, there's opportunities to make a difference in a young person's life. Speaking to a coach just recently, he told me of a story of a young man on his team and how they began to notice his behavior changing. And as they began to prod and do what coaches do, they found this young man had been living in his mother's apartment by himself for over a week. A single parent who was addicted to substances. Power had been turned off. He had not eaten food for a week. These coaches, their community, were able to rally around this young man. I can only imagine what would happen had he not been in that place where the sports gave him an outlet and an opportunity for those coaches to make a difference in his life. And I'm simply asking you this. Let these kids play. Students need sports for their emotional, their physical, their mental well-being. And two, seniors don't get another chance. They don't get another do-over. They don't get another year of eligibility. This is their last chance. This is it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. That does conclude the 2 minutes that we have set aside.
May I take her 2 minutes? Sure. I'm standing before you for 40,000 people.
Ma'am, if you would like to speak, you could have 2 minutes, yes.
All of the issues that you guys are talking about hit home. My phone has been blowing up all morning with moms praying because their kids are, just like my husband said, looking at their last year. Their spring season is canceled. We don't know what's coming up, but we know that coaches are calling, they're waiting, they're looking for fall sports to make those decisions on scholarships. For any of you paying attention, you heard the story of the young man from South Florida who spoke up for his teammates. He's already got an offer, but his teammates don't. He wants to see them have that opportunity. We know that you guys are making a decision in unprecedented times, but I'm telling you to listen to the voices of the people. As much as you're listening to the voices of the experts, as parents, we're asking you to listen to us. I've listened to every hour of the last 2 of these meetings. I've heard you guys go back and forth, and I understand the importance of what you're looking at, but I'm asking you to hear us. That's what this petition was about. And if today we added up all of the people who have signed a petition and we brought them, we would fill 3 arenas, the one in Jacksonville, the one in Tampa, the one in Miami, full to capacity with people asking you to let their students play. It matters to them, it matters to us, and we're just asking that you would take that into consideration. 3 days, 40,000 people. Had we let these go for 7, we might be looking at 100,000 people. There are only 800,000 high school students in the state of Florida. They don't all play. Last year, you guys reported a record number of people attending your championship games. We exceeded that number with parents asking you to come. Students asking you, coaches asking you, refs asking you, athletic directors asking you to let their kids play.
That's fine.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all for traveling here today.
Thank you.
Are there any other?
No, that's it.
So that does conclude our portion of public comments. At this time, we will move to item F, which is an executive director's report.
Thank you, President Otero, and good morning to everyone again. Thank you for the opportunity to report to you. To help us put us all on the same page, I'd like to turn your attention to the very first page of your agenda and recall the motion that was made on July 23rd. The motion was moved to temporarily postpone the start of all fall sports until August the 24th, allowing established summer policy to continue until that time, and directing the executive director to work with the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee and the FHSA Advisory Committees to prepare a recommendation for the start of fall sports at an in-person meeting of the Board of Directors between August the 10th and August the 17th. Again, there are 5 parts to that motion. One is to postpone the fall sports calendar until August 24th, to continue using our established summer policy, directed the executive director to work with advisory committees to come up with a recommendation to you, to prepare a recommendation for the start of fall sports, and then to have an in-person meeting, which is what we are doing today. I want to share with you that in the last 3 weeks, I did convene meetings of 10 different advisory committees via the Zoom platform. We have 6 fall sport advisory committees, and I also met with the Athletic Directors Advisory Committee, the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, Fall Officials Advisory Committee, and the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. As you are aware, policy determines the number of people who serve on those particular committees and the makeup of those committees. In order to guide us through that discussion with those meetings, the FHSA staff created a common agenda for all committees to follow, so we would be all looking at the same thing. Staff created 3 different options or concepts to guide that discussion. As you know from looking at your agenda, pages 15 and 16 in your agenda is a copy of that calendar or those concepts that we presented for discussion at those groups, and also the agenda. We had absolutely great dialogue in those 10 different meetings. The shortest meeting was 90 minutes long, and the longest meeting was just over 3 hours long. Every committee was given the opportunity to explore other options, and the 3 options or concepts that were presented were merely to start discussion. In our agenda, we asked for the individuals who were participating to give us an update on the status of their particular community and or geographic area, including school start days and instructional options if they knew those, and also to speak on the importance of the state series competition to that individual sport, that individual who represented that committee. Then we discussed the 3 different concepts and any other suggestions that those folks made. And then finally, so we did all the same thing with all of our committees, we asked those participants to rank, not to vote, but to rank those concepts or those options. I'd like to share with you briefly how those committees responded. In the sport of golf, there were 9 advisory committee members participants. The state series is very important to them. The common theme was that golf is a low-risk sport. Golf courses remain and have remained open. And very importantly to this group, the golf courses are available in the fall for high school teams, and courses may not be as readily available in winter and spring due to the number of winter residents that we have here. The committee of 9 chose option 1 unanimously. They ranked option 1 unanimously, all 9 members. 8 advisory committee members present. The state series also was very important to them. Some courses at the present time are not available. They may use special courses somewhere, but other courses can be created, even if it's at the school site. They were very clear on that. The cross-country committee was relatively split on this. 5 persons ranked option number 1 as their first choice, and 3 persons ranked option 3 as their first choice. In the sport of bowling, we had 5 advisory committee members participating, and also 2 consultants. The consultants, we have a tournament director that helps us manage the state tournament, and we had a lane owner who also participates with us. The state series also for that particular sport was very important. Lanes are open now, and leagues are playing now. Lanes are available, much like golf, for high school use in the fall. It's a little more complicated in the winter and spring for bowling due to the number of winter residents that are here in the state of Florida. And very interesting, this particular group brought up the concept of and the concern about multi-sport athletes. I think that many people bowl between sports, and if we change things around, they were very concerned about that. Of the 5 voting members of the committee, 4 ranked option 1 as their first choice, and 1 ranked option 3 as their choice. In the sport of volleyball, there were 8 advisory committee members present. The state series also very important to that group. There exists a very strong conflict between a very active club season that happens in the winter and spring if volleyball was not to be played in the fall. There was a lot of discussion on whether volleyball is a high-risk sport or not a high-risk sport. There was a great deal of discussion about that, and productive discussion. They pointed out to us that there was a huge tournament in Orlando area with over 10,000 participants, and no one knows of any issues at this time that might have arisen from that. I don't know that for a fact, but no one was able to report that. The committee was relatively split on this. For option 1, 2 individuals ranked this as their first choice. For option 2, 2 committee members ranked this as their first choice. And for option 3, 4 persons ranked that as their number 1 choice. In the sport of swimming and diving, we have 10 advisory committee members, and we also had 1 consultant. The consultant is someone who runs our state tournament for us. With that the state series is very, very important. This group was a very, very creative group, we found. It was interesting to hear their discussion. They discussed the possibility of having 2 different seasons. They discussed the possibility of splitting seasons in swimming and diving. They discussed the split seasons for different geographic areas of the state. Very creative discussion there. There is a concern that if moving swimming out of the fall to move it to the winter is a little complicated because of the weather. And also we have major tournaments in the springtime, and the Olympic trials is also. My understanding, I've heard this, I'm not a swimmer, but swimmers train for certain peak performance, and as the body trains, I don't understand all of that, but that was brought up as a discussion point. If swimming were to be moved out of the fall, swimming in the North and Central Florida in the winter is too cold, and I certainly appreciate that opinion that was shared. Of that group of 10 people, it was also split. For option 1, there were 4 individuals who ranked that as their first choice, and 6 who ranked that as their first choice for option 3. In the sport of football, there are 9 advisory committee members who participated. The state series is very important to that group also, but is very, and more importantly, the opportunity for players to play was brought up a number of times. Also, the concept of flexibility. Flexibility in scheduling was a very important component of that discussion. Option 1 was a unanimous decision by that particular committee. I will make another note that there's 1 individual that serves on the football advisory committee that also serves on the sports medicine advisory committee as our active coach on that committee. The individual was very supportive of option 1 here, but he did not support option 1 when the sports medicine advisory committee time came around. I thought that was important to note after that individual heard that discussion. In reference to all of our sport committees, those 6, safety was paramount in everyone's discussion. Working with our various sport governing agencies, the Golf Association, the U.S. Swimming, U.S. Bowling, the NFHS and FACA, our staff created and forwarded to all of our schools and also posted on our website sport-specific safety considerations, forwarded those to all of our member schools. Those happen to be on pages 53 and 59 of your packet. As I mentioned, we had other advisory committees. Our Athletic Directors Advisory Committee is composed of 15 members, all established by policy, their makeup and number, and all attended this meeting. There was absolutely excellent discussion at that time and very, what I consider, appropriate representation of different geographic areas and regions of the state. I will put this little note in here that our ADAC has I won't be real strong with this word, a reputation of being somewhat combative and often argumentative in a professional way. But this particular meeting was very professional, collegial, outstanding camaraderie among all the athletic directors from around the state. The state series was very, very important to them, but not the main focus of this particular group. This group also, like our coaches previously stated, they want flexibility, and they know they can manage their athletic programs if given the flexibility. They were very interested in starting school, seeing how school works out, and then addressing athletics a bit later. In this particular ranking, they are completely split in option 1. option 1, 7 ranked this as their first choice, and in option 3, 8 ranked that as their first choice. The next group we met with was our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. 10 students participated in this area. Again, fantastic geographic representation from all around the state. The state series is very important to our student athletes. They made that very, very clear. You would be happy to know that even though I enjoyed meeting with the others, this is my favorite meeting of all. Our students are knowledgeable. They were insightful. To me, they were inspirational. They are tomorrow's leaders without a shadow of a doubt, and you that work with them on an individual and daily basis should be very, very proud of them. In reference to their ranking, for option 1, 8 of those student athletes ranked option 1 as their first choice, and 2 ranked it as their, for option 3, excuse me, ranked it as their first choice. The Fall Officials Advisory Committee, we had 9 members participated in that very healthy discussion, and there was a lot of discussion about the health of officials. We've heard that before, the age of officials and protecting and making sure their health is appropriate. However, it was also mentioned, but right now, many of those same officials are working all the summer programs that we have, from travel softball, travel baseball, other AAU competitions, and our officials that work essentially year-round are working now, right now. It's interesting that there was mixed acceptance of mitigation suggestions, such as electronic whistles, officials wearing masks, ball handling, ball cleaning. I'm just saying that because there was a lot of discussion about that, and very interesting, but very cooperative group also. There was some discussion also that if the seasons were changed completely or switched around, we might have a difficult challenge in finding officials, because we have many multi-sport officials, just like we have multi-sport athletes, and they're tuned into officiating in the seasons that we have established. That particular group of 9 individuals was split also. 4 individuals ranked that option 1 as their first choice. 2 individuals ranked option 2 as their first option or first choice, and 3 ranked option 3 as their option or their first choice. Our last group that we met with was our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. There were 14 participants on this Zoom call. Here's the important thing, I think I'm representing this group well. The decision, whatever that decision is, should be based on science. Recognition also that science is changing on a daily basis or weekly basis. They also, as another group, want to see the impact of schools opening. They were unanimous in their opposition to option 1 or 2, and they were unanimous in their appreciation for the concept of 3, and they would be supportive of that third concept if there were appropriate scientific measures used to determine the safe return to sports and the ability to practice and play. Dr. Kevin Farmer will be joining us later. He's in surgery right now. He serves on that committee. And Dr. Jennifer Maynard, who you've met via Zoom call, is, I understand, watching our program right now, and will have the opportunity to join us on an audio feed should you have any questions for her. After meeting with our 10 committees, it was very clear there's some common themes. Every group mentioned safety as the #1 issue. Every group mentioned the desire to play and compete. Every group talked about flexibility in scheduling, and every group mentioned that the state series is important. There was very, very little in concept or option 2. As our meetings discovered, again, there was a great deal of interest in delaying the sport season, the sport calendar, essentially option 3. So to address that, there are 2 concepts provided in your packet should you wish to or be interested in discussing them. On pages 17 through 38, as you've already seen, there is an option 3, I believe it's called option 3A. With it, there is a header page that describes all of the sports. This is on page 17. And we have moved some sports around because of availability of facilities and things like that. And then behind that, we have a number of pages, 20 or 22 pages, of individual sports and how the calendar would look for that possibly. Now, that particular option or concept for your discussion, if you so choose, has an arbitrary date picked of the beginning of December, essentially the beginning of December. November 30th, I believe, is a Monday, and then a projected calendar from there on out. After listening to our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee and their interest and concern for having measured devices and measurement benchmarks, if you will, even though those are changing and we're not sure how to apply those, we have created page 39, and that would be similar to option 3. That's postponing the seasons and creating another season, other seasons, but it would be dependent upon the measuring devices going forward. And again, our staff certainly would need some great assistance on those benchmarks if necessary. Throughout this whole process, and actually my entire time as an educator and executive director here of the association, I've always thought of what can we do? What can we do for our member schools, not what we cannot or will not be able to do. I'm a firm believer in flexibility, especially in this challenging time that we're in. I'm a firm believer in parental choice, and I'm a firm believer in local decision making. And as you do your deliberation today, please remember there is no requirement for students to play a sport. There's no requirement for a school to have a team sport. And finally, let's not forget, our schools are opening. They are opening. Our Governor and Commissioner of Education are insistent that our schools reopen, and our Governor and Commissioner of Education know that extracurricular activities and athletic activities are part of that school opening. With this information that gleaned, I met with staff, and I refer you now to pages 1 through 9 of the board packet and agenda item action 1, as it has been amended today. And I think it would be appropriate at this time to entertain a motion to the effect so the board can begin discussion as needed.
Superintendent, are you making a motion, sir?
I move that we approve the recommendation submitted by our executive director.
We have a motion and a second. At this point, we are open for discussion.
Mr. Ochoa.
Mr. Ochoa?
I would like to propose an amendment to that motion. Pardon me if it gets a little lengthy. I'm going to try and be as short and succinct as possible, but I think it's important that everyone understands the basis behind the amendment that I'm offering. My recommendation is for the approval of the plan to begin fall sports practice on August 24th. However, amending that with a September 18th opt-out date for state series competition, with a provision provided whereby the executive director waives bylaw 8.8.1 for the sake of allowing those teams, districts, or counties that opt out of the state series to be able to adjust their sports calendars for all the sports seasons, addressing not just fall sports, but all in general throughout the course of the year, accordingly to meet the needs of their individual districts or counties based on their present conditions. For the sake of preserving bylaw 2.8, which deals with competitive equity due to the COVID-19 pandemic that we're in right now. I would also ask that in the sport of football, in this option, that the minimum game requirement for those that do opt in be addressed or waived, because there may very well be certain sections that decide to opt in but may not be able to play a full schedule due to their start date. It may not coincide with this August 24th date if they do so. In doing so, it allows the districts and the counties the flexibility if they have to opt out for the sake of maximizing the participation in their counties, in their districts, and due to facility restrictions that certain areas still have, allow them to still offer that sport sometime throughout the school year where they can go ahead and add it to their calendar appropriately.
Mr. Ochoa, if you could just state the motion, and then the discussion items would go within that.
Okay?
So do you mind repeating what your motion is?
Okay. Again, I recommend approval of the plan to begin fall sports practice on August 24th, 2020, with a September 18, 2020 opt-out date for the state series, with a provision provided by the executive director where he will waive bylaw 8.8.1, allowing teams, districts, counties that opt out to adjust their sports calendars for all sports seasons accordingly to meet the needs of their individual districts or counties based on their present conditions. All right? For the sake of preserving bylaw 2.8, which deals with competitive equity, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic for this school year.
So we have an amendment on the motion, or on the floor, sorry. Do we have a second to Mr. Ochoa's amendment? I'll second. Mr. Johns has seconded it. Any go ahead.
And I go again, in addition to this, I failed to mention this, the piece about football and waiving the minimum game requirement in order to enter into the state series, that be added to that amendment as well. I think this proposal provides flexibility for all, okay? It allows for the SMAC recommendations to be followed by those districts that are in the situations they're in or that choose to, okay? And it maximizes seasons for all our members, okay? In addition, I would ask that the Fall State Series dates and formats be addressed at our September board meeting, right, which would be after the opt-out date, and allow the board and staff to take a look at equitable adjustments that would need to be made in order to carry out state series competition based on participation, because we will know how many teams will be able to opt in, how many will opt out, and provide or allow for alternate seating and other needed adjustments. The one key component that I got in talking to a lot of the constituents, and I think it applies to all the sports. Again, there are many districts that are not ready to begin, okay? Many districts that may not be ready to begin by September 18th, okay? But yet, we don't know where this thing is going to go a month from now, okay? And if they choose to opt in, the biggest concern that they have is having equitability in terms of time to prepare themselves for state series competition on the latter end. And what I'm trying to say is this, and I'll give you an example. In football, if a given county decides September 18th that they're going to opt in, yet they have not started, okay, in all likelihood, they may only be able to play 5 weeks of football, if at all, okay? And in order to be equitable in terms of preparation time, what they would ask is that we extend a window prior to state series competition to allow them to properly prepare their kids for state series, and that they're given an equal shot. That was basically the only backlash that I got in discussing this plan with constituents, not just in my section, but in several sections. And again, I think I've addressed everybody's concerns yes, we're very diverse. We've talked about that. We've rehashed that and revisited it many times over the last 2 meetings and through the 3 task force meetings that we had prior to. Not everyone's the same. Not everyone's going to be the same in this situation, all right, because of what's in front of us. And the reality is that the unknown is been there. It's here today, and we don't know how long it will continue to be a part of us. But again, our whole thing is safety. This allows everyone to safely proceed depending on their conditions and what they deem to do. And it does not penalize districts that have to adjust sports because of facility issues, okay? It does not penalize districts for having to truncate their calendars, okay? And it allows them to offer every sport to our student athletes. And I think that's the important thing, that they be given an opportunity to play safely, okay? That our coaches feel safe, that our officials feel safe, and following through with whatever we ultimately vote on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. Mr. Oliva, I see your hand, and I'm going to call on you next. I just want to remind everyone to please speak into your microphone so that people can hear you. And also, because we are now discussing potential options that we will look forward a vote on, as Mr. Tomlin said, we do have the availability of Dr. Maynard on the line. I would like to get her on the line so that as you all have discussion items, she is present and able to speak. So, Mr. Oliva, do you mind if I get her on the line, and then we will go directly to you?
Of course.
So Ms. Rohr said I need to text her. I don't know where Ms. Rohr went. Text her to call in, and I'll do that right now. Mr. Oliva, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. I just want a point of clarification. I think Mr. Finlayson and my hands were going up at the same time. And I want to start by saying this to Mr. Ochoa. I completely respect and appreciate everything you just said. And my comment here is nothing to undo anything that just happened, but we had a recommendation from Mr. Toman that was motioned for approval by, I believe, Mr. Moore, and seconded by Mr. Johns, and then that motion was amended to add Mr. Ochoa's, or actually, I don't even know if it was officially amended to add, but we took a motion and a second on Mr. Ochoa's recommendation to that motion, and I think we're getting too far away from the original motion. So if that motion needs to be amended, I think the people that first approved the recommendation or motion need to go back that process. I just want to make sure that we're following a proper protocol for clarification.
Mr. Ireland, I'll refer to you.
You have a motion on the floor that was the original motion that was put forward by Mr. Tomlin. That was seconded. As I understand it, Mr. Ochoa has moved to amend that motion, and I believe that was seconded. And now we need to vote at some point in time on the motion to amend. And then if the motion to amend fails, then the original motion comes back. If the motion to amend passes, then you will vote or discuss and vote on the motion as amended. Does that answer that?
Well, and I think that's kind of where I was going. Before we started getting into discussion and
Correct.
getting further down this conversation, I wanted to make sure we were having a discussion on the approved motion that has been presented and as amended.
And I think the president recognized that and asked Mr. Ochoa to make the motion and then discuss it at a later time, which is where we were.
Dr. Maynard, are you on the line?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Obviously, we are deliberating an amendment to a motion right now, but I wanted to bring you on so that any board member would be able to ask questions of you from the SMAC report. So if you could just sit tight as we deliberate.
No problem.
Thank you. Mr. Gertis.
Sorry to do this, but I really need clarification because I'd like to offer a very quick second amendment, and I don't know if I should do that right now or wait until that one is.
Let's do them one at a time.
That's fine. I didn't know the proper procedure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Schusterman.
And I have a motion question, well, I have a question too. In the beginning, when we talked about amending the agenda, we talked about when we would discuss the other options. Before we vote on the amendment, not the amendment, before we vote on the motion, we will have the opportunity to discuss the other options, correct?
Whenever you are allowed to discuss a motion, it will be whatever motion is on the floor. If that answers the question. In other words, we don't know where we are until we get a vote on the motion to amend the original motion. But at the time that there is discussion, it will be on whatever motion is on the floor, would be my recommendation to the president.
Thank you.
Ms. Patrica.
So is it even legal for us to have the executive director waive a bylaw? It's my understanding that the only time we can adopt or amend a bylaw, an operating bylaw, which is what 8.1 is if it's done by the Representative Assembly, and the 4.6.2 allows the executive director to waive a bylaw, but only in order to be in compliance with state statutes. So again, Mr. Ochoa, I love the content of what you said, but I don't know that we as a board have the authority under our governing documents to allow the executive director to waive a bylaw under these circumstances.
Mr. Tomlin.
Thank you, President. Thank you for the comments. And I would like to, if possible, attempt to simplify our discussion here. It will not involve giving anyone authority to waive any policies or anything or bylaws. I believe what Mr. Ochoa is saying, and I'm going to put it in a couple of sentences here in a minute ago, because of the diversity of our state and the inability of other areas to actively participate in the fall calendar or the entire sport calendar that we've designed, he'd like to see some options. I have a proposal for, I think, some simple wording that I would like to hear some discussion from this group. And that would be that assuming this board approves the fall calendar as presented, then an amending FHSAA member schools to opt out of the state series and the approved sport season calendars, and to work with FHSAA staff to design regional calendars to permit play outside of the approved sport season calendar for school year 2021. So what I believe what that would do is to permit schools that are able and willing, for whatever reason, to go ahead and follow the approved fall calendar. And then for those schools and or school districts who are unable, for whatever reason, by whatever measure, to not participate in the regular fall's calendar, to make a decision not to go into the state series and to create their own agenda, their own calendar system. I'm thinking of our 4 counties in South Palm Beach, Broward, Dade, and now Monroe County, because they're so geographically located. We'd be happy to work with them. This is the whole concept of flexibility, to work with those schools and those school districts to create a regional calendar. I think that the wording would be simple enough if we could do it. I'd entertain some discussion on that.
Mr. Johns.
If you look at 8.8.1, which was discussed about being waived, it legitimately gives this board the ability to set those calendar dates. And so if we decide as a board that we're moving forward with the calendar and we follow the guidance of our executive director on the flexibility side of that, we would be well, according to what I'm reading, well within our bylaw rights to be able to do that without waiving anything. Because it specifically says the board of directors makes that decision on season limitations. So that would be what we would be doing here, is making a decision on season limitations, if I read it correctly.
Ms. Patrico?
So I'm not clear on that, Mr. Johns or Mr. Tommen. It's my understanding we have to set the earliest possible and the latest possible date. So are you saying that we'll start on August 24th and the latest, we'll have a state series in there somewhere, but the latest possible date will be the last day of school? Like, how does that work? If we have to set the earliest and latest possible date, how do we allow Dade and Broward and all of the other, Lee, Hillsborough, all the other counties that can't play right now, how do we allow them to make their own schedules in their own sports so that every kid in our counties can play?
Mr. Ireland, was there something you needed to say on before I address that?
Yes, go ahead.
I believe under 4.6.2, one of the executive director's duties and responsibilities is to perform any other duties as may be assigned by the board of directors. So if you want to frame that in assigning him the duty to do whatever is encompassed in the amendment to the motion, I would suggest that that fits within that.
Ms. Patrico, do you feel that your question was answered before we get to Mr. Johns? No. Mr. Tommen, can you help assist Ms. Patrico with that answer?
My opinion is that this board sets the fall sport calendars, and that's what the calendar is for member schools. The paragraph that I read gives executive director the option and the opportunity to work with those schools who make a commitment not to be in the state series to create another calendar in this unusual situation this year. So fall sports starts August 24th, winter sports starts whenever, and then those schools who notify us that they cannot do that, unable to play, unable to practice, that we work with them and let them create their own schedules to still give the opportunity for all sports to play regardless of the season, regardless of the established calendar. It's not a violation of anything in my estimation.
Go ahead, sir.
And Mr. Trigger, specifically, as out of the box and as unusual as it may sound, but those are the times that we're in. To answer your question, yes, you could set it as the last day of school. Traditionally, you have a fall season that ends at a certain time within the spring season, within the winter season. That does not mean we have to do that. So under the times that we're in, if we're looking for flexibility, if we're looking for schools to have the opportunity to play when they, and that's been the theme that I've heard from Mr. Ochoa since the beginning of this all started, having a chance to play when they can play. This gives us that flexibility. It sounds crazy, but that flexibility is there in that bylaw for us to make that decision if we decide it.
Series where the season ends, but a different end date for other counties. That's the part that I'm struggling with. That's the part that I don't understand. And that, again, I know we're in unusual times. I know that, and I know that no solution we pick today is going to be perfect, but we have governing documents for a reason, and that reason is equity, so that every student in the state, every school in the state is treated equally and fairly, and that's what these rules are constraining us to right now. If we can't accommodate Mr. Ochoa according to our rules, then that action is unfair to him, right? Am I making sense? I'm a super rule follower, and it's really hard. I can't read 4.6.2 and find the authority of the executive director to do this. It doesn't exist in there.
Mr. McLean.
So is this any different than the first board meeting we had when we had the long discussion about start when you want to, play when you want to, the FHSA will work with you? I mean, we had that long discussion in the 5-hour board meeting, if you remember, and that was one of the proposals about starting July 27th, and that kind of got shot down or voted down. So is this really different? And then the other question, Mr. Ochoa, is you start when you want to, and then where does it come, talking about the state series? So if I've played my 10 games and you're still on game 2, are we saying we're not having state series in your proposal? Or do I have to wait until you got your 8 games, so I've got to practice 4 more weeks until you get to that point?
Go ahead, Mr. Ochoa.
All right, if I can address that, no, it does not. Again, I had an opt-out date set in the proposal, okay, which gives schools the date by which they need to either opt out or opt in. When they opt in, the only difference between a school that would play a full 10-game schedule and those who might opt in is the fact that they may end up playing less games than you in the state series calendar as set, and therefore we need to explore alternate seating arrangements. But no, it doesn't penalize you in terms of what games you're allowed to play if you're allowed to play all 10 in my proposal.
So you're saying that if we start, just pick a date of the state series, November 6th, 7th. So if you've opted in and you've only been practicing 2 weeks and haven't played a regular season game, but you've opted in back in September, that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around.
I think the rationale would be that come the 18th of September, if they're not ready to begin and at least get 5-6 weeks worth of season in, they're not going to opt in. Okay, number one. Number two, the reason why I asked the minimum number of games limit to be waived is for that purpose. Because again, if we're in a situation where our schools opt in the 18th of September, yet we haven't started, good likelihood is that they may only get 5 or 6 games in. And to be fair to them, I don't think that the ranking system would be appropriate to be used in determining seedings.
Is this any different than option 1?
It is because,
I mean,
again,
that's what I'm trying to figure out. What's the difference between what you're saying and option 1? Because option 1 is you opt in, however many games you have, it's a blind draw. That's what I'm just, I'm trying to understand the difference. So when it comes time to vote, I know maybe I'm the only one that's not understanding it.
Well, again,
Sir, Mr. Ochoa, if we could please follow procedure by raising hands when you want to speak. We can't have this debate back and forth appropriately. Everyone would be given an opportunity to speak. So I'll get to Mr. Schusterman and then Mr. Ochoa if you want to continue with something you were about to say.
Okay.
May I ask Dr. Maynard a question?
Dr. Maynard, are you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
What is the positivity rate today in the state of Florida? And by your estimation, how many counties would be eligible, would be 5% or less?
So it, of course, depends on which data source you are referencing. The Florida COVID-19 Department of Health dashboard has a 7-day rolling average for the entire state of Florida of 9.76. That one has been brought into question in the past, so we have another option to look at, one called covidactnow.org that breaks it down per county. Currently, the state positivity rate for the entire state of Florida on that website is 17.7%. If we look for the benchmark of 5% or less, there's one county, Hamilton County, that is 4.4%, and Union County has a 5.3%. The rest, the other 65 counties are basically 6% and higher. There are other benchmarks, mind you, and I'm happy to explain those when appropriate time is, because I know the percent positivity has been called into question a couple times, and with epidemiology benchmarks, they're just that, they're benchmarks, and so there's a lot of data and a lot of background as far as looking at different options like the effective reproduction number as well as the incidence new cases per 100,000 in a population. So I'm happy to explain those and talk about how many regions meet those as well, if that is a question you'd like me to address.
He shook his head yes.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. The video is a bit delayed from the audio, so thank you. So the other benchmark, which the World Health Organization describes it as the best indicator for controlled and declining infection rates, is the effective reproduction number. And the best way to explain this RT or RE, depending on which source, is that it basically means one person will infect a certain number of other people. If they infect one person or more, the infection will exponentially grow. If they infect less than one person, then the infection rate will start to decline. So the indicator that the World Health Organization in their May 12th document recommends for reopening society is an RT of less than 1 for at least 2 weeks as the best indicator that the epidemic is controlled and declining. This is, of course, a complex calculation, but it is done for us on that COVID Act Now website. And if we look at the infection rate, currently there are a fair number of counties that are below that infection rates are less than 1. I'm trying to pull it up now so I can tell the exact number, because it has improved even since this document came out, which is a good sign for our state. Now 43 out of 67 counties do meet the requirement. So there's the additional, doing quick math, 34 that do not, 24 that do not meet that requirement. All the way up to the highest is 1.61 in Baker County, understanding that there's some correctional facilities there, but as I've mentioned before, positivity rates in correctional facilities are important to note, and that indicates a high risk of community transmission. COVID does not know boundaries. It does not know prison walls. It does not know the walls of a nursing home or other in-home facility. So it does tend to come out into the community with those correctional or healthcare workers that work there. So keeping that in mind, I do think Baker County's numbers are important to note for that area as well. So that's the RT or RE infection rate. The other benchmark that this MAC recommends is looking at the new cases per 100,000 persons within a population, and this is looking at the incidence. The Harvard Global Health Institute came up with these measures in a very well-supported document talking about the importance of the public needing clear and consistent information about COVID risk levels and how it's important to look at that on drilling it down all the way to the community or county level. So the main target is a path to zero case incidence. And they have a risk map that is connected to their website as well, but you can also get that information from the COVID Act Now website. And keeping in mind the breakdown of greater than 25 cases per 100,000 is considered critical and uncontrolled spread. 10 to 25 cases per 100,000 is considered dangerous, and 1 to 10 cases is considered cautionary and still virus is spreading. Less than 1 is the only green zone, and that's indicating virus containment. I can say at this point in time there are 0 counties that are in the green zone. The lowest we have is 12.4, which still is above 10. That puts us in still a dangerous zone. In Glades County is the lowest current rate. And the highest, of course, is Baker County, followed by Franklin and Gulf County are the top 3. So keeping that in mind, no areas in the state of Florida meet that guideline. Can I answer any other questions about the benchmarks that the SMAC recommends?
Ms. Patrica has a question.
So you've given us 3 benchmarks. Which is, would you expect us to follow all 3? 1 or 2 of the 3? Is this an and, an or? And which is the most reliable and recommended?
So this is, debated across the board. I think, there can be some, the World Health Organization, I think I would rely on for the number one. So looking at that infection rate to indicate declining. Now, again, keep in mind that it has to be at least 14 days under that R of 1. And the importance there is that incubation period. And so you cannot judge stability of viral spread in any time shorter than 14 days. Our previous document recommended looking at a 28-day average. That was to allow a second incubation period buffer. I understand that's kind of hard to swallow from a planning perspective. And so I would say, the reproduction number, it would be great if this was an and situation. And I think that would be the safest scenario if we could say you have to hit all of these benchmarks. But if you have trending down cases over a 14-day period, the goal would be to get down less than 10, at least to the cautionary zone for the new cases. And in our number of less than 1 for at least 14 days, then, we just have to be cautious with interpreting the percent positivity because the goal is less than 5%, and that has been stated both in the World Health Organization and as we discussed before, the school opening, and I know that is happening as we speak, but the school opening was recommended by the Florida chapter of the Academy of Pediatrics. They put out a white paper indicating that they did not think it should reopen and also stressed the importance of the 5% positivity rate. So I just think it's important to look at all three dashboards. The number two recommendation we have on there is the R number, and I think that one is probably the most important to lean on, as well as the cases per 100,000, because that does take into account the smaller populations.
Mr. Finlayson, do you have a question of Dr. Maynard? No? Mr. Johns?
I have a couple clarifications for the doctor. The first thing, we're talking about the 14 days for someone who is obviously not as educated. Could you explain to me in that 14 days, so let's say we get to day 13 and we go above that number, so that means our 14 days starts over again if we're over for 1 day out of the 14, yes or no?
So it's a rolling average. So you have to monitor it. I would say your days, you would have to see what happens the next day. Your rolling average could bring it back down. I would say you would not be able to start on that 14th day if day 13 went up, but you have to monitor the rolling average.
Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily start over, but it would extend that 14 days.
Correct.
Okay. All right, second question. This is not just for her. Are we discussing the document at this time, or we're not discussing that document at this time? Okay. All right, because I have some questions if we get to that point, but I don't want to do it out of order. So, okay, thank you.
Mr. Finlayson?
My question previously was trying to get us back on order. I believe what we should be discussing is the amendment that Mr. Ochoa made to the original motion and trying to make a determination on whether we approve that amendment or not. So with Mr. Ireland, I'm correct?
You are correct.
Okay. So
if my memory serves me correctly.
So, yes, I'm older than when the discussion started, so I understand exactly what you mean. With that, all of this discussion then is appropriate because, well, the beginning part is appropriate because it relates back to this amendment. Okay. So if I can, then I want to share Ms. Patrica's concerns about the importance of processes and rules, but I'm very confident in the fact that if we move forward with this, the Representative Assembly actually meets October 19th for the coming year. So we could have some really good language in place that would set aside those concerns prior to the start date of any of the fall sports championships. So that would allow us to at least begin that discussion, and then the Representative Assembly hopefully could ratify what we as a board were recommending in that direction, if that makes sense.
I would just ask for a point of clarification. It's my understanding that what is proposed or approved at Representative Assembly would not go into effect until July 1st of the following year.
No, that's not accurate. The date is set by the proposal. The proposal, it could go into effect immediately if that's what the proposal stated.
Okay. Ms. Patrica.
Then I'm comfortable operating in accordance to rules that are in effect at that time, but those rules are not in effect today. So I don't know how to get there based on the rules that are in front of me today. And that's really what how we need to be operating is based on the rules in front of us today.
Mr. Ireland?
I think the way you could get there, Ms. Patrica, would be to have the amendment to the motion include a recommendation to the Representative Assembly that these changes be made. Does that?
It is totally clear, Attorney Ireland, but the fact would remain that the bylaws have not changed as of today. I need to vote to violate a bylaw today, and I can't vote to violate a bylaw.
All right.
I'm sorry, I'm very black letter.
I understand, and I do believe that, in my opinion, that you can, under 462P, assign the executive director the authority to do what the amendment to the motion suggests, or direct him he has the power to provide amendments to the Representative Assembly, and direct him to do that, which then would be in effect by the time that as I understand the amendment, by the time the amendment comes into effect, if the Representative Assembly agrees, then you won't be violating the bylaws. Does that answer your question?
We can agree to disagree.
I understand that. Good people can always do that. Thank you.
Mr. Tomlin?
Thank you, President Otero. And for a little bit of clarification, the board by 8.8.1 sets the season limitations for our member schools. And that's what you have done in the past, and that's what we are proposing to do today. The bylaw does not say that season limitations cannot be amended under pandemic or extraordinary circumstances. And I think that's as simple as I can make it, to approve the current existing calendar, the proposal, and then permit member schools to opt out. That's not changing a bylaw. I don't think that's not changing anything. That's certainly your authority to do that, and to giving our staff the authority to work with those schools in creating a schedule that opt out in that arena to come up with another schedule.
Mr. Dodd has not spoken yet. He had his hand up.
And my question is dealing with 8.8.1. The way I read it, and Mr. Johns made a comment that we set the schedule, the dates. Is it a violation of our bylaws, Mr. Ireland, of 8.8.1? It doesn't sound to me like it is as I read 8.8.1.
I read it the same way the executive director does, that it is exercising the prerogative of this board of directors to adopt the season limitations, and if you adopt them, you can change what you adopted.
So for Ms. Patrica, I don't think we're violating our own bylaws. I don't see it that way in this case.
So what is the latest permissible date for practice and competition? What would the latest permissible date be in order to accommodate a state series in football and accommodate counties that will not be able to play football anytime in the foreseeable future?
If you could answer that first.
I believe the dates are established by the calendar. I am going to look to my left here. The dates are established by our calendar. And for those schools that want to play in the state series, they play in the state series at that time. And if they opt out of the state series, as we've given them the opportunity, they can play a regular season game during their regular season. The proposal is that those schools who opt out of the state series also have the opportunity to opt out of that established calendar and to work with staff to create a calendar specific to that area. Let's take Lee County, for instance. I have to pick on you from Lee County. If Lee County and the high schools there do not want to or cannot, by whatever decision making that they want to not begin their fall sports, they notify the association by September the 18th, and they tell us they're not going to play in the state series, and they'd like to play beginning their winter sports season, their sports season in January, and then we work with Lee County on coming up with a calendar that Lee County can play as many and all sports as they want to from January through June. I think that, and we would do that. We've said that from the very beginning.
Mr. Johns.
Okay, I have 2 points again. One, to address the issue that we're talking about at hand, there is nothing in this bylaw that states that the state series is the last day of the season. Okay, we decide when the last day of the season is. If we say that it's June 1st, then it's June 1st. You can have a state series in there. I'm not saying it specifically says otherwise. It just does not limit you to saying that the state series ends the season. The season ends when this board says the season ends. The second thing I would like to point out is that according to state statute, any public school can withdraw from the FHSAA and set their own calendar whenever they choose. They do not have to be a member of the FHSAA in order to do that. State statute allows that, okay? So they can set their own calendar whenever they want to. So, I mean, you've heard discussion all over the state about that, so there's nothing saying that it could go either direction. Someone could say, well, we want to start now. We're going to opt out of everything, pull our entire sports programs completely out, and then we're going to go play if there's enough people to play. That could be done tomorrow. So, but I want to make sure that my opinion is that we are not violating anything because there's nothing in black and white specifically says the state series ends the season.
Mr. Finlayson.
So I want to jump on board with Mr. Dodd and Mr. Tomlin and Mr. Johns, again, as an effort to assist my fellow passionate rules person in Ms. Patrica. But as that reads, the board of directors shall adopt season limitations in each sport which conducts a Florida High School State Championship Series. I believe they all are correct that state championship series can be at any point during that season, as well as we could, because we're tasked with that authority, we could give the executive director authority to work out individual situations within that county, which when we do that, according to Mr. Ochoa's recommended amendment, I believe that we are fully within the authority and complying with that bylaw in order to do that at that point. So, still just trying to help.
Superintendent Moore.
Madam Chair, I would like to call for question on this amendment.
We would need a second on that.
Before, he had his hand
Oh,
up.
I'm sorry. Before.
Yes, a lot of things we all talk about. Me just joining the board. I have a question for Jeff and Mr. Ochoa. I guess they have some conflict. But my question is, have the FSHA sanctioned since March 11th or when we came to the pandemic for certain counties to start practicing or doing any activity? So at this point, if I can get an answer, at this point, everyone should have not been doing anything, correct?
No, that is not correct. We did suspend the spring season. The spring season was then canceled, and then whatever the date was for the summer policy to take effect, at the 1st of June, our schools were to be back following the summer policy. If they were able to follow that, they could follow the summer policy. And then going back, before the July fall season date. I forget what date the actual board meeting was, but we recommended that we begin the fall season on July 27th. The board approved that, and then at the same time heard a report from our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, and then the next week, I believe it was, I don't have the dates in front of me, did the motion that you read on the agenda today, postponed the fall sports until at least August 24th, and continued the summer policy through then. So schools around the state, if they're able, have been able to participate in our summer policy, whatever that may be, if that answers your question.
Yeah, so that will put Region 3, Region 4, which is Dade County, Broward, Palm Beach, the hot spot, pretty much behind the 8 ball, where more of northern Florida would have had the opportunity to maybe continue with some activities. And that will go with their question if South Florida playing maybe 5 games, where northern Florida may have played 10 games. And with us having rules and regulation as far as the point system from the 4A on down in the district, that would cause some conflict within that. So my question would be more or less, the district and the county will have control to set their schedule, how they choose to set it under the FSHA, or they can do it on their own pretty much. If they decide not to get back in the series, they can pretty much create their own calendar, their own schedule.
As I understand Mr. Choa's concept, it's something that we're very supportive of. Let's pick Dade County. You were from Dade County.
Yeah.
And if the Dade County school system and or the schools that are under their jurisdiction decide to opt out of being able to play because you cannot play, and you opt out of the state series and opt out of the calendar that we already have set, that would be permissible, and that our staff would work with the administration, the athletic administration of Dade County, to come up with a calendar. And I know that Mr. Ochoa has already done a great deal of work on a proposal for a possible calendar. I don't have that in front of me, and we don't need to get into that discussion right now, but it would be perhaps having a season for January and February for some sports, and other sports March and April, and others May and June, whatever it might be. And we would be supportive of working with you on that. If those individual schools or that school district decided to go that direction, they would not be eligible for the customary and original state series playoff in the established fall, winter, and spring seasons. Okay. But they would have the opportunity to play. And I keep hearing that terminology, the opportunity to play and participate. If you'll remember, that was a theme that all of our sports committees suggested, the opportunity to play and participate. And if in this unusual year it needs to be outside of the calendar, so be it. We want to put forth that message over and over again. We'll be happy to work with you on that. At the same time, preserve for those schools who want to stay in the state series the opportunity to play in the state series.
We have had the question called. Dr. McDaniel seconded it. So at this time, we would vote.
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. That does not end debate, and it does not require a second. But I'm ready to vote. That's what I'm saying. But it does not end debate, and so
go ahead.
I just wanted to address with Mr. Hanks a couple concerns. One, traditional districts do not apply this year. Points do not apply this year. Minimum games has already been waived. So those concerns have already been taken away when it comes to any proposal that we're looking at today. I just want to make sure that you were clear on that, which would be huge concerns for all of us. Those have been already taken care of and put aside.
Dr. McDaniel.
I just want to make a comment. Not that it's all about scoreboard, but we are a sports group. So I counted 52 of the groups that you listed that wanted option 1 and 41 that wanted option 3. So I think Mr. Choa's motion does both of those things. It allows the folks that want to start to go, and it allows those that can't or don't feel ready to build an alternate schedule. I agree with his motion. I think it makes perfect sense.
Mr. Schusterman?
What we're voting on right now, is it a choice of the options, Or is it just adding the amendment to whatever plan comes out?
It's only adding an amendment to whatever plan is voted on.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Can I clarify this? And I would like to have someone either agree with me or not agree with me. That what we are voting on right now is to accept the amendment to that sports calendar, which would permit a school or schools to opt out of the state series and to work with and opt out of the original sports calendars and to work with the staff to create a calendar for sports for that particular geographic region. I think that's what we are saying.
Correct.
Mr. Finlayson and then Ms. Patrica.
Yeah, and sorry, because I know the question's been called, but I want to make sure we're answering the right question. So, Mr. Tomlin is correct, but that's not to add it to whatever comes out of this discussion. It's to add it to the original motion, which was to stick with the current calendar as the executive director. So it's combining those two things together. We're voting to accept that, not the whole thing, just to accept that as an addition to that motion.
Right.
Ms. Patrica?
That, I was just going to say, we have to vote on the amendment, and then we can discuss
Right.
the motion as amended.
Correct. So we're not having Mr. McLean has a comment before mine.
Mr. McLean?
So how does this affect option 1, option 2, option 3, option 3B? Does this trump them, or is this has nothing to do with them?
It's my understanding that whatever option is selected, if this amendment is passed, you would still have that option to do that.
Correct.
Does that answer your question?
I think I want to say something right now. Thank you for your attention and a good clarifying question. We're voting on now, or you being asked to vote on an amendment to the proposal that I presented that had previously been amended also in the agenda to consider other alternatives. I have to live with a secretary down here that is struggling with the wording. And she and I, next week or the week after or next month or next January, will be looking at the minutes of this meeting, trying to determine exactly what the motion was and put it in some kind of a print form. I'm going to look to Mr. Ochoa and also the person I don't recall, I believe it was Mr. Johns, who seconded that. And I would like to propose some wording that I think covers that. And correct me if it does not. The amendment would be permitting FHSA member schools on or before September the 18th, 2020, to opt out of the FHSAA state series and the approved sport season calendars and work with the FHSAA staff to design regional calendars to permit play outside of the approved sports season calendars for school year 2021.
Does that cover your motion, Mr. Ochoa?
I believe so.
Mr. Johns?
Ask another question. I just want to make sure I'm correct. So your original motion was to stick with the proposed calendar that starts on August 24th, correct? And this amendment adds to that proposal. Is that correct? Okay, all right.
As I understand, if you look on the top under current, on action item number 1, the executive director recommends approval of the plan to begin fall sports on August 24th as presented. I believe it was amended to include the discussion of proposals and other alternatives, and to permit whatever I said. That would be, if this amendment is approved, then that would be the motion. Carlene, does that help you? Thank you.
Carlene's going.
Okay.
Any further Discussion. At this time, then, we will vote on the amendment as Mr. Tomlin just read. All in favor of the amendment to the motion, please raise your right hand. Those opposed? So the amendment passes. So now we are back to the discussion of the original motion to include the amendment that just passed. As we begin discussion, I will just point out the reminder that Dr. Maynard is still on the line if you have questions of her, which I believe, Mr. Johns, you had indicated you did, but Mr. Gertis has just raised his hand, so I will call on him.
I have a question for Dr. Maynard just yet, but I had indicated that I was going to have a second amendment, and I will make this quick. And if it doesn't go anywhere, that's fine. I'd like to consider that the entire issue be discussed and voted on for football and discussed and voted on for every other fall sport separately.
So your motion is to consider a plan for football specifically and then all the other sports separately in the fall.
Correct, but I'm willing to say all the other sports together as opposed to individually.
Is there a second on that? So not seeing a second on that, that motion would die. You're welcome. So we are back to discussion of the original motion with the amendment. Mr. Dodd.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify the choice of September the 18th. Is that a good date, or how was that date developed, I guess, would be my question.
Mr. Ochoa, if you'd like to speak to that.
The reason why I posed the September 18th date is because that is directly right before our next board meeting, which is scheduled for the 20th and 21st. That will be the Friday prior to our next meeting. And it gives schools another month to take a look at the trends and again be able to put in place those CDC guidelines if they so choose, before they opt in or opt out. That was the premise behind that. I mean, that's a date that could be moved backward if need be, but I think that would be an appropriate date, being that we do meet the 20th and 21st, and it would be a good time to evaluate what the participation level would be and determine how to proceed with state series play. And
thank you.
Does that answer your question, sir? Ms. Patrica, you had your hand up?
Struggling with the equity in this. Mr. McDaniel, you mentioned that it satisfies those who wanted 1 and 3. However, districts that can't start, schools that can't start, don't have a chance at a state series. So to me, that's not equitable. And it really leaves out the 3 largest counties in the state of Florida and doesn't provide them an opportunity for playoffs. So would this give us an opportunity as the south part of the state to come together and have a regional championship of sorts? Or if we're not accommodating all kids, we're not fulfilling our beliefs as an organization.
Mr. Finlayson, you have your hand up, but I want to ask Nadia very quickly, did you take care of what you needed to take care of? She needed to swap some cables and asked for a pause. You're good. Okay. Mr. Finlayson.
I'll wait if somebody wants to address. That was a question? Or Ms. Patrica?
Dr.
Okay.
McDaniel wants to.
Go ahead, Dr. McDaniel.
Well, since I was named specifically, I'll respond to that. That's exactly what I thought. I don't want to get into the NCAA, but that's exactly what they appear to be doing as well. And I think Mr. Choa said that on multiple occasions during our Zoom calls, that those very large districts should have the ability to get very creative in that. And with the number of schools they have, I would think that working together, they can create a very incredible opportunity for every kid to do that very thing. I think it'd be meaningful as well, since those are large schools with lots of resources, I would assume, and lots of opportunity to get really creative within their own calendar, and it'll be very local. I think that's a very creative solution, absolutely.
If I could piggyback on something that Ms. Patrica was saying, and she emphasized the the 3 counties in the southern part of Florida. With Dr. Maynard on the line, if I could ask Dr. Maynard, based on the data that you were discussing earlier, it seemed like there were quite a few counties in the north where this virus was growing. So that kind of encompasses more of a statewide problem as opposed to a South Florida problem. Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So yeah, since our last meeting, and we were in the midst of quite a big surge at that time in certain parts of the state, those parts of the state, including some of the southern counties, are trending down, and, including Miami-Dade and Hillsborough. I'm trying to locate them on my search app here. But there are several counties in the north and in the Panhandle region that are actually increasing and at a rather worrisome, from a medical perspective, rate, both with daily cases as well as infection rate as well as positivity rate. So hearing the discussion and what Mr. Ochoa had suggested, he did say in part of his discussion, following the SMAC guidelines, I think that right now the majority of the state does not meet the SMAC guideline benchmark. So I'm not sure which states would feel comfortable from a medical perspective beginning to play in any sport, especially the contact sports. And so, looking at specifically the data, and I'm happy to break it down by county, it's all quite concerning. We are improving in certain areas, and we are getting worse in certain areas. And my fear from a medical perspective is until this virus is given the respect that it deserves to quiet down, we, by introducing sports, are just adding fuel to the fire. And the main purpose of the SMAC's recommendations to wait until we can see more data 2 to 3 weeks into school, so we can see what happens with exposures, incubation period exposures during that time, to see if we can follow the guidelines, masking, social distancing, smaller class sizes, some virtual options. I think we can get a handle of this. It is possible, but everyone has to do their part. And sports absolutely acknowledge their importance mentally, physically. We want to be back out there, but until this virus is given the respect that it deserves, we're not going to get there. So my concern is that, yes, parts of the state are improving. There's parts of the state that are getting worse. At this point, the SMAC does not recommend starting any sports in any part of the state until we're able to see what happens when school opens.
Thank you. Dr. Longshore.
Thank you. Just for a clarification, Dr. Maynard, from the World Health Organization, that was the number one data piece that you said that we should refer to. Was there 43 out of 60 counties that would meet that recommendation, that requirement?
Let me pull that back up here. So the infection rate, there's currently there are 43 counties, according to the COVID Act Now website dashboard, that meet the guideline.
Okay, and that was the top one, the number one recommendation that you would think that we should look at to refer to for strong data?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johns?
I have a couple things. I want to address the comments earlier about equity. I completely agree, completely understand. I would like to point out that no option we have, no option we could dream up between now and the time we vote is going to guarantee that everyone's going to have a chance to play in the state series. So if that's where we're trying to get to, we'll never go home. So there is a concern of equity, but no option we have is going to guarantee that if we started whenever, that there would be, that you would be able to participate in the state series. Second thing, just to address the comparisons of North and South, I just want to make sure I point out that there is not one single school district in the North, in the Panhandle, as it was referred to, that is not going to brick and mortar schools. So we're going to be in school starting next week, everybody. There are some that everybody's got options for virtual, but everyone's going to be in school. And so, I still struggle. I have for 3 meetings now, struggle again today with not allowing kids to participate in any athletics, but yet we've got thousands and thousands of kids that are going to be on campus. So that's just an observation. I have a question. My question for the doctor was in reference, now that we're talking about this document, and I'm not criticizing, I'm asking a legitimate question here. Was this document developed during the last SMAC meeting and with input and agreement from everyone? I know the recommendation that came out was to not start at a certain date. I just want to make sure the document we're looking at was collaborative amongst everyone involved in that meeting and came out of that meeting directly.
That is correct. Everyone has had input on the document and has approved the document that was submitted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patrico.
So, Mr. McDaniel, you mentioned that the NCAA is being creative and they're having regional championships, and I'm asking the question. I was notified last night that they were canceling fall sports championships. I didn't read anywhere that they were doing regional championships. So, I'm sorry? So they didn't cancel, NCAA didn't cancel state champion, or I'm sorry,
If you want to get in the
national
weeds, NCAA it doesn't control the national championship of football. That's the issue. They don't control the championship. The Power 5 conferences control the championship.
I don't know what that means, I'm sorry. I'm a professional football
I shouldn't
fan.
even mention it. That's not part of this meeting. I'm just pointing out that large school districts that have to delay for good reason can get creative, and I think this board shouldn't limit them.
Okay, I've got some comments. It was mentioned, Mr. Johns, about the start of school, and that's really, here in Florida, that's really my biggest concern. My biggest concern is starting school. We have worked so hard, and I'm so grateful to the Chancellor and to the Commissioner for the flexibility we've been given to open schools in a way that allows virtual and in-person options. But it's going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult. The change management piece of opening schools is going to be overwhelming for the first 6 to 8 weeks when we open these schools. Just like hospitals, when COVID first hit hospitals, it was constant change. Way of work was changing, protocols were changing, it was exhausting and it was overwhelming. And they pushed off elective surgeries because they knew they couldn't do it all successfully. And here we are opening schools with an understanding that we're going to have to change, we're going to have to adapt, we're going to have to pivot. And throwing sports on top of that, it feels like it's setting us up for failure. And we can't do it all correctly. We don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the resources, the additional safety measures that have to be put in place. I mean, you look at college programs that are canceling, and they Ivy Leagues charge $72,000 a year to attend the school. We get $7,900 per kid. And I don't see the equity, I don't see the fairness, and I frankly don't, from the seat in which I sit, I don't know how we do this and protect kids and protect the opportunity for us to have any kind of a season in Lee County and in most of the counties that I represent in the south part of the state. We're not going to be able to play football, and everybody hates talking about the revenue. It feels distasteful. But it's true that football pays for every other sport in a building. And if we don't have the opportunity to play football and generate revenue, every kid in our district suffers. And so I don't know how we do this fairly. I don't know how we expect public schools in particular to succeed unless we push off the start date for all sports, not just football, but all sports. And listen, the other thing I want to say is, to the parents who are here, I don't know if they're still here, but I'm a parent of 3 high school students who play football and swim and desperately want to be on the field, and I desperately want to watch them. But I can't make this decision from the heart. I've got to make this decision from the perspective of what's fair and what's safe. And my SMAC committee is telling me the safest thing to do is option 3B. And I don't know how, again, I said it last time, how do I ignore the medical advice? Those are my comments.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Johns.
And I'll address Ms. Patrica, as far as the rest of the board is concerned also. I respect that. I totally understand the situation. It is going to be very difficult. Just getting kids back in school is going to be difficult. You add sports on top of that, it's going to be difficult. There is no doubt that your comments on that are absolutely correct. And I agree with that completely. What I would like to say is that I had 30, I sent a spreadsheet out this morning that you guys should have received. There are 30 school administrators, 21 superintendents out of the 30. The other ones were divided up amongst ADs, coaches, principals, that type of stuff. But 21 superintendents that I represent are willing to accept that burden to be able to start school and start sports. And, with local control being important, and I understand the data, but if those superintendents and principals believe that they can pull it off, I just have a hard time telling them that we're not going to give them the opportunity to do that. And, there again, everything you're saying is correct. It may not be manageable, but I have a hard time us sitting here telling all of those people that want to give it a shot and are willing to bear that burden that we're not going to give them that opportunity. It's their school districts, it's their constituents, it's their people. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Do you have a comment?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, President Otero. If you look specifically, Ms. Patrica, at option 3B or some form of that, should Lee County make the local decision to not begin sports by following whatever recommendation you want to follow, your local health department, the FHSA SMAC, any one or all 3 of the benchmarks that they use, and you choose not to begin sports, Lee County can do option 3B or some version of it. And that's what this motion says. This is permitting a county or a school to opt out of the original calendar and the original state series and come up with something else. So you can. No one is
One
saying
of the
you cannot.
things you said, Mr. Tomlin, is that in every advisory committee you met with, the state series was very, very important.
That is correct.
So you are denying us the opportunity to be in a state series, and you're denying every other district that can't play the opportunity to be in a state series. That's the equity. Again, it's about equity and fairness. And if we as a state go in different directions, and one other thing is, it's kind of like, the 1988 Olympics when Russia wasn't there. Mary Lou Retton wasn't like a real gold medalist. If we're leaving Miami-Dade out, if we're leaving Broward out, if we're leaving the big counties out, it's not, it doesn't feel fair.
Thank you, Mr. Schusterman.
I think we're getting away from the science aspect of it. That's what concerns me. The health of kids, the health of coaches, the health of officials, and the future of some of these kids. I've been talking to pulmonologists, other doctors, and people who are talking about the effects. A major league pitcher's career might be over. Is that the risk that you take to play sports? I think we have a responsibility to make a sound decision based on the medicine and the science. And I know we all have disagreeing, we have different ways of looking at it, which numbers are good, which numbers aren't good. But look at the other states where their schools are opening up. And I think the one thing that SMAC wanted to see was 2 weeks of us seeing schools open, kids crowding around. Look what's happening in Georgia. Look what's happening in Tennessee. Look what's happening in those states where they are shutting down schools in rural areas because it's incredibly difficult to control these kids once they go back to school. Have you seen the numbers for the last 2 weeks of July nationally of how many kids are involved in these cases? That is what concerns me. That's the bottom line for me, is the safety of the kids we're putting out there. And I'll be honest with you, the people that I've talked to have said, and even SMAC has said, there are safe ways for your coaches, our coaches, to be involved with our kids. To still be doing programs for them, to still have contact, to work out, to do conditioning, to do things. But to have interscholastic competition between schools is a dangerous thing. I just have to say it. Every minute, what I think about is the safety of every kid we put out on the field or put in a gym. This thing is far from over. In 1918, 196,000 people died in October. And yes, you can talk about the war or whatever, but the war didn't end. They weren't coming back on the ships that early. It ended in November. We celebrate Veterans Day every year, and that's when the armistice happened. So they weren't on ships at that point. That was Americans dying in this country because we didn't have a vaccine, and we just went back. You can see pictures of people in crowded baseball stadiums. They were all wearing masks. By the way, America invented the mask. We're the ones who came up with it. So they were all wearing masks, but they were crowded and packed together, and 196,000 people died in October. I think that's what we should be looking at. And I believe we should be going with what SMAC says, and we have the staff has put together great options where we can move things back. They're moving it back in North Carolina. I just received something this morning. They're moving it back in states across the country because they're valuing safety. And that's where I am. I don't care about state series. I don't care about equity. I care about giving the kids a safe and positive experience. Think about if you start and then you have to stop again like last year. If we start and then we have to stop again, then we're really in trouble. But if we put it back and read the numbers that SMAC has put out there for us to look at, and we make sound decisions, it can be right. It can be done right. That's where I'm at. Thank you.
I have a question to follow up on that, and then I'll certainly get to Mr. Tora. Mr. Tomlin, in option 1, which is the option that you're recommending, I would say, we know that option 3B is based on SMAC's recommendations. Is there any scientific medical data source that you relied on to support option 1 that we aren't aware of that you could share that gave you that ability to lean towards option 1?
No, ma'am, there is no scientific data that I can share with you relative to that.
Okay. Mr. Tora.
Mr. Ochoa, first, thank you for putting together a plan that I believe is a nice compromise. Here's one of the things we're forgetting about when we look at Plan 3B, or pushing off sports. First of all, we've spent, this is our 3rd meeting, and I think the can is getting dented as it goes down the road. I was in favor of putting it off a little bit, but our people in this state are crying out for a date. I have received, along with most of you, probably 300 emails over the course. My emails are full, and 99.6% of them are asking us to give them a date, stick to it, and start now. These are parents These are coaches and so on that want their kids to get out there and play sports. Now, I agree that this is a worrisome time, but kids are going to do what kids are going to do. And if you don't think a lot of those kids aren't out there getting together, gathering, playing a little football on the side, you can't put them in a bubble. The only way to really beat this thing is for us to all go home, sit in a bubble for another 6 to 8 weeks until it's gone. But the state will probably go into bankruptcy. People will lose jobs. It'll be horrific. We already did that. The other thing we're forgetting about when we move these things back and back and back, you're forgetting about a lot of the private schools. We graduate our kids mid-May, most of us. We can't participate in sports in June. If we're a boarding school, like my school, who's paying for them to stay in the dorm? Who's taking care of them? So I'm all about equity too. I'm about safety. But how is that fair to push sports into June? Can't do it. You're going to eliminate a lot of people. I represent a section, and they all agree that option 1 is the way to go. The only way they would be in favor of option 3 is if we somehow figure out how to get everything done before our kids graduate and go off to school, or leave a dormitory. I don't see a way to do that. So I think, at some point, we've got to step out, make a decision. And I love the idea that the association is willing to be flexible with counties. I think that's fantastic. And again, Mr. Ochoa, God bless you for bringing that up. I think that was a wonderful compromise. It allows everybody to participate in some way or form. And it answers those who have been yelling at us in emails, pleading with us in emails. Please let my kids play. Please, let's get them out there. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Thomas.
One of the things that make this country so unique is the ability to move forward in times of pandemics. Flexibility has always been the model that this country used in order to move forward during a pandemic. I agree that safety should always be and will always be our first option. But I don't know of any parent, of all the emails that I received, I don't know of any parent that's not thinking of safety. I don't think of any communities that's not thinking of safety. I don't think if there's any superintendents today that's not thinking about safety first. But we can't sit in a shell. We can't sit. This country moved during the pandemic time. And I think we have to make a decision. We will make a decision that will move this forward. And also, athletics has been something that pulled communities together, pulled this country together. We realize that safety is our first priority, but we must move forward. Those are the emails that I received. Those are comments that I've received from parents. We have to move forward, keeping in mind that safety is our first priority. That's my comment.
you, sir. Ms. Patrica?
Dr. Maynard. One of the things that we're working on as a school district is metrics to determine when we have to close a classroom, even worse if we would have to close the school, and hopefully, prayerfully, we never have to close the district. But we're putting those metrics in place so that we know and we can tell the community this is what you should expect. And when I reviewed the SMAC materials, I didn't see any metrics for us to determine when does a player need to quarantine, when does a team need to quarantine, and I would like that guidance from SMAC, because we've had a heck of a time coming up with those metrics in our district. It's been weeks and weeks and weeks of working with medical professionals to try to determine, and that's on a school basis. So if a kid in a classroom, if a kid is exposed in a classroom and he's on the football team, does that mean the entire team has to quarantine? That's the kind of guidance I think I'm looking for from SMAC. I didn't see it in there. Is it something they've discussed? Is it something they can provide for us?
Thank you, Ms. Patrica, for asking. It is in there, not in that official report. We had separated Sports Med Advisory Committee considerations for returning to high school athletics. It is one of the supplemental materials starting on page 40 in your packet, and starting on page 45 is the action plan for positive screening or positive COVID-19 tests, and it addresses all of those questions. So happy to go through that if you'd like me to.
Ms. Patrica, would you like her to go through that?
No, let me pull it up and refresh my recollection.
I can just say while you're doing that what everyone's discussing, returning to sports and the importance of safety, of course that is and should always be the number one goal. Our concern with starting before we have proven that the schools are coming back safely is just what you're talking about now, is that this is going to be a very common theme as outbreaks are likely to occur both in school and or on the field. There are certain guidelines, and CDC recommends the screening measures. So in this packet is also our screening questionnaire, which I know we talked about at the previous meeting, and most schools are hopefully already doing some sort of screening questionnaire as the students arrive, temperature checking, as well as asking if there's been any close contact of COVID-19 positive. The one adjustment to the screening questionnaire that we added in here was the loss of taste or smell, which is a more and more common finding or sign that young, healthy people seem to have, and that can literally be the only sign that they have. So if that's not on your screening form, I highly, and the SMAC highly recommends that it is added to the screening form. If an athlete answers affirmative to any of the screening questions, then it's recommended that they are isolated, removed from the venue, and sent for evaluation by their primary care provider, where hopefully they would recommend testing at that time. The only testing that can be done to show an active infection is a viral PCR or antigen test. An antibody test does not show an active infection. I've seen that reported in some places, and I just wanted to clarify that. So if an athlete does test positive, it is written in our plan what we recommend, and that is per the CDC guidelines, that they are isolated if they're symptomatic for 10 days from the onset of symptoms. And if they happen to be a case that was found asymptomatic, it's 10 days from the test itself. If they're symptomatic, at the 10-day mark, if they have been asymptomatic for 24 hours and they have had no symptoms, if their symptoms have been gone for 72 hours and they're fever-free for 24 hours, they are able to come out of isolation. That's how they get back to play. The CDC no longer recommends a secondary test to determine if they are able to be removed from isolation. Then you asked about the close contacts, and this is also per CDC guidelines. It's anyone within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, likely without wearing a mask, from 2 days before the person tested positive or symptoms began. So that does take into consideration a lot of these close contact sports where potentially a whole line of a football team may be considered a close contact. Those close contacts are recommended to be quarantined, different word than isolation, quarantined for 14 days in order to monitor for any onset of symptoms, because that is when they're likely to be highest risk of onset of symptoms or viral shedding. The problem with this virus is that many, up to 40 to 50%, will remain asymptomatic. So just because they say, I feel fine, if you are considered a close contact, it is still recommended that you quarantine for the 14 days. So yes, this is likely to take out an entire football line based on one positive exposure. So this is why the concern from the SMAC is if you go into sports in haste without waiting to see that it is a safe, medically safe time to enter, you're likely going to have multiple disruptions. Option 3 or option 3B is a way to make sure that all sports are able to have a complete series, albeit potentially condensed, including this very valuable state series. So it seems to meet all requirements of the SMAC recommendations, everyone's equity with the state series, everyone's equity with complete seasons, and I do think there's probably a way they can manipulate the dates to get it in before June, before the seniors graduate. The biggest thing that the SMAC also thought is this arbitrary date of November 30th did not need to be that late. If the state of Florida can meet the metrics prior to that, we are more than happy to have the athletes go back to play prior to that date. So that's why we wanted to start evaluating the data sooner, mid to end of September, to let that happen. Thank you.
That didn't really answer my question. I see what's in the documents that she provided, but I think what I'm looking for, Dr. Maynard, is something more akin to what you provided for accommodations on a sport-by-sport basis, because exposure will look different in a bowling alley than it will on a football field than it will on a pool deck. And so, you know, the metrics we're creating in our district are different based on different scenarios. Am I making sense?
You are. I'm just not sure there's a way to answer that because the CDC just defines the close contact in one way. And so, you know, it's that 6 feet of proximity unless you've been sneezed or coughed upon. So the close contact sports are definitely going to be in higher proximity than some of the other lower risk sports.
Mr. Gertis had his hand up before that, I thought.
Thank you. If I could ask Mr. Harrison or Mr. Tom, either one of you, the first date for a football game would be September 4th, is that correct?
Yes.
And is that shorter than what it would have been in a normal calendar?
Yes, but I'm going to look at Justin, as I've been teased on social media to do, and let him answer this question. I do not mind doing that.
In fairness, I addressed it to either one of you, knowing that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gertis. Mr. Harrison.
Yes, after speaking with our committees, they've said they've been able to those schools have been able to get out there to continue to work out all summer and continuing now. They felt their kids would actually be ready to play sooner. It does still meet the heat policy in the handbook.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it seems to me, and as you can tell from my earlier death of emotion, that I have some specific concerns about football. I'm kind of willing to move forward because I really don't like 3A either because it moves sports around and you know, spring was impacted heavily last year and I don't want to impact them again. And I really want to deal with just the fall if we can. But I'm digressing. With football, it seems to me we already have a health risk and now we're adding an additional health risk, whether those coaches think they've been out there training enough or not, of playing a game that's already going to bring on new problems. And I'm just wondering if September 4th is just a week too early.
Superintendent Moore.
Madam Chairman, at this point, we've had a lot of good discussion. Could I ask just for clarification Mr. Tomlin would summarize where we are as far as the amended motion. And then, again, I would like to call for question after clarification.
Yes, sir, and I believe I have this, and I will also look down toward Carleen to make sure she has it also. And the motion on the floor is to begin fall sports as is presented in pages 1 through 9, to discuss other proposals and alternatives, and to permit FHSA member schools on or before September 18th to opt out of the series and the calendars and generate their own, et cetera, et cetera. That's the motion on the floor, as I understand it.
One more question for clarification. That provides extreme flexibility to districts, schools, athletic directors.
Yes, sir.
In scheduling the fall season.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Not only the fall season, but with that third part to permit districts and/or schools to work with the staff to create something that's outside of the regular original calendar.
Madam Chair, thank you. And with that, I respectfully call for question.
Second. Mr. Oliva seconded that. Mr. Schusterman had his hand up.
If Superintendent Moore,
Yes.
If Superintendent Moore's motion was to move the previous question, it's been seconded, it's non-debatable, and it stops debate once that's voted on. But you vote on the motion, basically it's a motion to stop debate. And so you vote on that motion. If it passes, then you go to the motion that's on the floor and vote on that motion. If it fails, then I guess you can then continue discussion.
And just a point of clarification, I call for question. I did not move for previous question. I'll be glad to do that.
Well,
if I can change that, I would like to make my motion that I moved for previous question. And that does end debate if it's seconded.
Right. Correct.
Mr. Oliva seconded that.
It does require a 2/3 vote for passage.
Now, as I did it incorrectly the last time, I mean, like I have purposely waited to give comments to give board members an opportunity to speak. Would I still be able to give comments at that point?
You will not, respectfully. If this motion passes by 2/3 vote.
Is there discussion on this motion?
No.
No debate.
And it takes 2/3, correct?
Correct.
This does because it limits the rights of the members.
Right.
This will require 2/3 of the majority vote.
Would you allow me to make my comments before we call that vote? Sir? Thank you. Mr. Finlayson?
No, I'm out of order, but I believe that we're required at this point to take this vote.
Pardon me for interrupting. If Superintendent Moore withdraws his motion, the second allows that, then the comments can be made. He can remake the motion. So it's the same thing. You get the same point.
I'm fine with that if you are.
I appreciate that, sir. And hearing everyone, we are all debating both sides, and we all have reasons to support both sides and want to support the opportunity for students to be able to play, absolutely. And this, I feel, goes beyond just students playing. There are officials involved in this, there are coaches involved in this, so it's a multitude of age range of people. I enjoy the ability to look at data so I can make an informed decision. So, Mr. Johns, you providing that spreadsheet for your area is helpful to see how people feel in that area. I don't know if all board members received this, but I know I did, and I believe several others that County AD in South Florida sent, which was the opinion of options 1, 2, and 3 from those counties that have county athletic directors. I can tell you at the time that this was collected, Hillsborough County was not on there because Hillsborough County was still debating and trying to figure out how we were going to start school. Looking at that option in these spreadsheets now, I can tell you Hillsborough County supports fully, our superintendent supports option 1. He feels that we are, as a county, safe. We've made the precautions necessary. We are ready to go should that start date be August 24th. I am conflicted because as a board member who is elected by Section 3, in looking at the data provided in Option 3, the majority of my section, which I represent, prefers Option 3. And looking in the spreadsheet that was provided, 252 schools prefer Option 3 over 79 schools that prefer Option 1. So we're in a position where I feel like there is no right answer, but yeah, we make the decision that I would lean towards, as a representative of a section, to rely on medical data in a medical crisis. So those are my comments, Superintendent Moore. I appreciate you allowing me to make them.
Thank you very much. And if you will allow me, again, I'll present my motion to move the previous question, which will end debate if we get a 2/3 majority vote.
Thank you. We have a second on his motion. Mr. Oliva has seconded that. And now we will vote, Mr. Ireland. All in favor? We have a second on the motion. Mr. Oliva seconded the motion. All in favor?
I have 10. I'm not sure.
Those opposed?
What exactly, I'm going to make sure. What exactly am I voting on?
To end debate.
Just want to make sure, to end the debate, that's all we're
Yes.
voting on.
Yes. There was some misunderstanding. If we would retake the vote, the motion is to end the debate that Superintendent Moore has called, Mr. Oliva has seconded.
Which debate? I just want to make sure, because
The debate of the motion
exactly
on the
which
floor.
debate? We've debated a lot of things, I think.
The debate of the motion on the floor, which is the recommendation of our executive director to adopt option 1 with the amendment that Mr. Ochoa made, which would allow schools to have that flexibility to be able to have their calendar whenever it was appropriate for them through the end of the school year or indefinitely. Does that answer your question? So all we're voting on right now is to end further debate. So all in favor of ending the debate, please raise your hand.
12. That approves.
Those opposed? Mr. Schusterman and Mr. Finlayson.
Did you vote? I'm sorry. I didn't count you.
I voted to end the
End debate. So that was, I've got 13-2. I need another one. Is it 13-3? I'm sorry. Thank you. I didn't see your hand. 13-3. Okay.
At this time, we will vote on the motion that was just stated with the amendment to accept the recommendation of the executive director to adopt option 1, which would be the start of fall sports on August 24th, with the proposed calendar that was included in the packet, and the amendment to allow schools to be able to start at the point that they feel they are ready, being eliminated from state series and a declaration date of September 18th to make that determination. So all of those in favor of the motion that was just stated, please raise your right hand.
Again, does this do away with
Yes,
voting
sir.
later on option 2 and 3 and 3B?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So please keep your hands up if you are in favor of the motion.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And your vote?
I have not voted yet.
Okay. It's 11.
Those opposed, please raise your hand.
Okay, I think I got it. Thank you.
And what was the number?
11-5.
So the motion does pass 11 to 5 to begin fall sports on August 24th with the amendment of schools having the opportunity to set their own calendar. Moving on in the agenda to the next item. Yes, sir.
I would like to request, we've almost been at this 2.5 hours, I'd like to request a recess for 15 minutes.
I was supposed to do that. Thank you, Mr. Dodd. We will take a 10-minute recess if that's good with everyone.
Test 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
Testing, testing. She's going to have to call back in because I disconnected her.
I feel like we just killed somebody. That's how I feel. Oy, oy, oy. And I gotta compose myself.
2-3.
He's back now. Hi, Dr. Maynard, are you there?
I am, I'm back.
We're going to resume the meeting here.
Okay, I'll go on mute until you need me.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to resume the meeting. At this time, we have another action item on the floor. That is the SMAC COVID-19 waiver. I see your name next to that, Mr. Thomas, but I don't know what the recommended action is.
The Sports Medicine Advisory Committee has at least recommended that this board consider this. And the reason you do not see a recommendation from me is that we have discussed this as a board before. I have heard some questions about whether this is a legal term and whether a school or a school district or a private school or a private entity would like to use this particular form or one like it. And so I have already talked to Mr. Ireland and told him that I would defer to legal counsel and your collective wisdom as a board to make the determination as to whether this is a requirement or a recommendations that schools use this particular form. So I certainly could entertain, I guess appropriately to entertain a motion to approve this as a whatever you want to do, as a required form or recommended form.
Do we have a motion on the floor, Mr. Gertis?
If this would be allowable, I would make a motion that we make it an available form. In other words, not recommend or require.
A second on that? Mr.
Yes, that's my motion.
Mr. Oliva had his hand up first to second it. So discussion, the current motion is to make this an available form to schools, not that it is required. And for your reference, Dr. Maynard is also on the line if you have any questions of her, since this relates to SMAC. What page is this, Mr. Tomlin?
10, 11, and 12. The actual form is on 11 and 12.
Dr. McDaniel?
hear from council. It seems like this would be in the same realm as, the heat-related issue, and why wouldn't we be a little more bold in this regard as a board?
Thank you. We do it as you pointed out, for the heat, the heart, and I think the concussion, more of education than anything else. I don't see any reason why not. If this thing passes, I guess we can take it out. But as a form, I do have a question, if I may, of Dr. Maynard, down about the third of the way. It says how to prevent and prepare for COVID-19. Whenever you were talking before, you mentioned control and decline. Would those be better words than prevent, or can you prevent COVID-19, or do you know?
I'm sorry, it broke up a little bit. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. This third bold, how to prevent and prepare for COVID-19, you mentioned in your testimony before control and decline. Would those be better words to put in there rather than prevent and prepare for?
Actually, no, I think it's worded appropriately.
All right.
These are the only actual ways to prevent and prepare for COVID-19. Once the infection is out and virus spread is occurring, that's when you need to control and decline.
All right. Second question I have is under practice strict hand hygiene, you have 60% alcohol, and then under clean and disinfected 70%. Are those contradictory?
It should be 60%.
Okay. And then wouldn't it be better, and this is medical as opposed to legal, but what to do if I think I was exposed to an individual with COVID-19? Shouldn't that just stop with contact your personal health care provider? Otherwise, we're giving medical advice to do several different other things.
I think the bullet points are clear and should remain from a medical perspective. I think if we're asking our athletes to go back as of August 24th, we need to provide the parents enough information, and I think this should be called more of an informed consent rather than a waiver at this point. If they are going to go back to play, they need to understand the risks of going back to play, both parents and students.
Those are the only questions I have, Madam President.
Mr. Johns?
Just for clarification, so right now the motion is just to provide this, but if we were to require this, it would supersede any local protocol. Is that correct?
It could. I'm assuming it could be any addition to any local thing, Chad, but this would then be required for FHSAA member school students and their guardian to sign.
So even if something on here, I'm not saying it is, but even if something on here was in conflict with local protocol and school protocol, they would be required if we make this.
If you made this a requirement, that's my understanding.
Thank you.
Mr. Ireland can help me on that, but that's my understanding.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Mr. Hanks?
In this literature, do we have anything when they do the physical that they were required to take the COVID-19 test? Or are they allowed through the HIPAA law or anything to get that one test with the kids?
Could you repeat that?
I say in the forms, being that we are talking about COVID-19 and understand, I know it's not really effective with kids, they more.
May I answer that?
Yes, go ahead.
So the NFHS updated document that was just released last week addressed testing and said that they did not recommend blanket or universal testing of high school athletes. However, if a student athlete is concerned and wants to get tested, that is up to them, especially if they have symptoms or concern of a close contact. One of the important factors is disclosing to the team physician if you have had a positive test in the past, even if you have recovered from that infection, as more data is emerging that even with mild and asymptomatic cases, there can be increased risk of heart and lung issues. And so it's highly recommended from the SMAC as well as multiple other entities, including the NFHS and the American Medical Society of Sports Medicine, to have an evaluation prior to return to play. So this document is just more educational and informed consent, but then returning to play will be up for another discussion, as we will have multiple student athletes coming back throughout the next few years that have had prior.
It also gives the kid the opportunity to dictate whether they want to play or not, in the sense of if they have some symptoms to deny because I want to still compete with my team and I don't want to tell the truth. So we kind of take that away from the adults, put the trust in the kids, and we know at that age and the competitive nature, the kids going to want to play and they're going to do whatever that it takes not to tell the truth.
Mr. Schusterman?
The difficulty with just doing a test at the physical is that 3 days later they could come in with contact with somebody, and then that test that they did wouldn't mean anything. So I mean, it's not. You can test today and come in contact with somebody tomorrow, and then a week later, you've got it. So just to randomly test every kid is not going to clear anything up.
That is correct, Mr. Schusterman.
Thank you.
Mr. Dodd?
This is a great educational piece. I think it's important that our athletes and parents sign this. I know a lot of the emails that I got, parents said, we don't have a problem signing a waiver. You know, if that's what it's going to take, and I think that's what it should take, because I would not want anyone coming back saying, why didn't we know this? You know, why didn't you tell us? This document has all the information so that they know, they're on notice that there is risks associated, and we need to make you aware of those risks, just like we've done with heat-related illness and concussions, you know, sudden cardiac arrest. This is a part of it. I would like to see us require this.
Mr. Finlayson?
I have a question for Mr. Ireland. Mr. Ireland, do you have a recommendation in regard to whether we make this available, recommend it, or require it?
You know my theory on requirements. Having said that, I don't see any difference in what we have already done with related to the heat, concussion, and the heart. So if you're going to adopt it, you might well go ahead and be consistent, if that answers your question.
Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, I wanted to pose a question to Dr. Maynard, and this goes back to a statement she made before in reference to return to play. For those student athletes that are diagnosed, pre-diagnosed, and are coming back, should we have some type of form similar to the return to play form that we have for concussions that we might want to look into and include?
I think that is an excellent suggestion, and the SMAC would be happy to put a form like that together. The issue is they're going to, have to be able to bring that information, similar to a concussion. There should be a return to athletics clearance form requiring a physical evaluation with a medical provider, as well as the NFHS and AMSSM have recommendations regarding a potential cardiac evaluation, which from the most part includes an EKG or ECG. And then depending on the results of that and the severity of the individual's infection, may also require a lab test called a sensitive troponin, possible echocardiogram, and perhaps a myocardial MRI. I will say from the NCAA, they've had about 12 collegiate athletes already that have been diagnosed with myocarditis associated with COVID-19, and that's prompting a lot of their delays and cancellations. So this is a real concern, and I think having a return to play document similar to the concussion to be released by a physician is paramount.
Thank you, Dr. Maynard. And I wanted to point that out, even though with our concussion return to play, and I'll give you a case in point, and I know in our county, it's an either-or option, and we have the concussion clinic program that we use in lieu of the form, but I think we do need something similar to that because of those heart conditions that have been prevalent and keep popping up in the media. Thank you.
I'll speak to Mr. Dodd's comments. I also agree that if we're going to have SMAC recommendations that are telling us we should do these things, erring on the side of safety allows these things in place. And making this a required document, I would even take it a step further, the NFHS video, COVID for administrators and coaches. If you haven't seen that, it is a great snapshot in about 15 to 20 minutes. I would put it out on the floor for anyone who would be interested in making a motion that that is also required, even though your current motion is only a, what did you say it was? Make available to consider that as well. Yes, Mr. Schusterman.
I think it's so important, the more we can educate parents on what this is and what's going on, the better off we'll be. And how do we act on the first recommendation, on the first motion? Okay.
Comment, I'm getting a little concerned if this is a part of the EL3. The EL3 is becoming such a large document that I don't think people are reading any of this. I really don't. And that concerns me. So, you know, if anything, maybe it becomes a separate document. The other thing that bothers me is I'm not an attorney, so I don't understand it all. But anytime there's a release from liability for something we know is, you know, everybody knows is a risk, scares me a little.
Any other discussion?
We are litigating that as we speak in the, I think it's the 4th District right now, as to the validity of the release that we have. One of the questions that was raised in the trial court, we weren't in that case, but we came in amicus, was that the fine print in the case, the judge had to get a microscope to read the print in the EL3, the basic EL3. So that's the only comments I have on this. And it's attached, the release is actually the first 2 or 3 2 pages, I think, of the EL3, and then we put this in together with the concussion and the heat related.
Any other discussion?
So, I mean, I seconded the motion, but whichever direction.
So the motion on the floor is to make this document available to schools should they wish to utilize it. Seeing no further discussion, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of making it available, please raise your hand. Those opposed, please raise your hand.
I counted wrong. I got 7 there. Was it 9? 10-6. Can't be. That's 16. 10-6. 10-6. Did you count Ms. Otero? 10-6.
So the motion passes to make this document available for schools to use if they wish. The last agenda item.
I'm sorry. Did you want to address the video, or do you want to wait till new business for that possible? Okay, thank you.
I'll wait till new business. The next agenda item was submitted by Mr. Finlayson Mr. Finlayson, I will turn it to you to present that agenda item.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I do think that we need to be forward-thinking, that this is definitely unprecedented times, but we need to plan policy accordingly, that we will give the executive director the ability to work on the behalf of what's in the best interest of individual school communities in the future, and also allow for individual school community leaders to make the best decisions possible for their school communities. So just a quick summary is what we already decided is to be able to work with schools individually to set up a different season outside of our calendar dates. I think that that should be able to go in either direction based on the circumstances and situations. However, I'll look to Mr. Ireland and Mr. Tommen. This may be better to work in some of the language that Mr. Ochoa included, because this is only about being able to start prior to a revised date, not going past a date, and I think that that's important to include that. Also, on behalf of Ms. Patrica, this may be better suited to go before the Representative Assembly rather than a board policy. So I will look to Mr. Tom and Mr. Ireland. If you feel like this is better suited for Representative Assembly, then I would withdraw this item and go through the appropriate channels to make that happen. And I would be glad to answer any questions about the purpose as well.
I'll take a stab at that, Mr. Finlayson, and we'll certainly defer to council also. I believe that the origin of this particular proposal was to address an issue that has been taken care of today, and that is the start of this particular season. So I believe you're on the right track, that this is not an urgent issue. This could wait either for this board to take action or for the Representative Assembly to take action or consider taking action at a later date. I think that. Mr. Ireland?
Okay. And if I can follow up to that first, I agree that it's not an issue that impacts anything today, but I do believe that it's wise business of this board or of the Representative Assembly to be forward-thinking so that we have set this in stone, that this is able to happen in the future.
I agree that it probably needs to go for the Representative Assembly.
Okay. So with that, if there aren't any questions, Madam President, I will withdraw this from board action and begin the work to get that before the proper body, the Representative Assembly.
Mr. Oliva?
Question for clarification. Is the intent, and I agree with the process, I'm totally fine, I just want to know, is this the intent to establish this protocol permanently, or is this for a one-year request on a as-needed basis, or what was the thinking?
So I believe that we've all said we're in unprecedented times. The next time this happens, it shouldn't be unprecedented times. We should have precedent set, and so my goal is, prayerfully that this won't happen again, but if it does, we will be armed and ready with the tools that we need to meet the needs of every individual school by giving the executive director that authority, which we have done today. Does that help?
It was for clarification, and I think that if we follow that process by taking it through the appropriate committees before the board takes action, it's the right direction to go, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that motion is withdrawn. At this point, we are on new business. Yes, Mr. Schusterman.
I just have a question for my, since we're in a section that is not, we're not ready to open in any way, shape, or form, will summer rules just continue for us until we are capable of opening? We're just we're just shut down? Nobody can do anything?
Okay, fall season starts on the 24th.
So if we can't go into fall season, we,
Let me
Okay.
let me try to finish here.
all right, I'm sorry.
Fall
I
fall
apologize.
season will be starting on August the 24th. Again, I'm going to look to my left and to my right here. If your particular school wants to declare now that you want to be not in the state series and to do a different calendar, I think it would be okay that you continued summer activities. However, fall sports does start on the 24th for all member schools, and so you would be under the fall sport guidelines. Does that make sense, Mr. Harrison?
Yes, it does.
And I'm not trying to make...
I thought we were dealing with flexibility in a pandemic.
I understand, and I
So-
appreciate that term.
I think it would be appropriate, Mr. Schusterman, for you to make a motion to then have discussion on this exact item. In which we're a new business, so you certainly have the right to do that now.
I would like to make a motion that for those areas that cannot begin competition on whatever date, August 24th, the first date, that they have the ability to continue summer rules.
Do we have a second on that motion? Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Johns.
And I may be totally wrong here, but the only difference between, I guess I'd have to look at all the differences between summer and regular season. So, but typical summer activity, I'll use me as example, what we do in the summer would fit under the guidelines of the season as well. We wouldn't put pads on or whatever, but I mean, we lift weights, we do 7-on-7, we practice, we whatever. So we would still fit underneath those guidelines, even though it's not, quote, summer. Now, I can't speak to every single sport, so
Right.
that may be an issue, but.
The issue I have, and when we talked about not doing sports in the beginning, and there was still the talk, and SMAC did recommend that we can do things within our school to have our kids involved with coaches, to have our kids working out, to keep them physically fit and doing the things safely that we believe we can do. When I talked about it earlier, it was not that just we're going to shut down and do nothing until we were to get to to option 3. The talk here is that the schools that cannot put teams on the field, that are able to do things in-house, how can we make that possible for those kids? So they're still getting the effect of coaches and the positive reinforcement and those kind of things. That's what I want to know.
Mr. McLean?
I think the only thing that it affects, it doesn't change anything for any fall sport except for football. On the 24th, you can start putting on helmets, but every other sport can keep doing what you're doing except for winter and spring sports. Volleyball, swimming, golf, all that football can keep doing what they've been doing up to this point. All the 24th means is you can now, because it's the official start, now teams you can have tryouts, official tryouts, you can have official practice, but you can keep doing, like we're in phase 1 still in our county, we can keep doing that the 24th. If our county says, no, you're not going to start. So I could be wrong. Am I wrong, Justin?
No, sir. That's it. That's what I was going to ask you. What are you looking to do? Because again, as was stated, the only thing that it stops is the winter and the spring sports from doing actual sport-specific activities. Because now you go to policies 21 for the off-season stuff for the winter and spring, but you're still permitted to be with your golf kids, your cross-country kids, even your football kids. You can still train, condition, whatever you're doing now, you're permitted to do.
So I can condition with my winter sports kids. They can do conditioning, right?
Yes, sir.
If I open it up to whole school, so all those, it's possible for them to do all those kind of things.
Running, training, stadiums,
Okay.
weight training. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second. We are still in discussion. Mr. Finlayson?
Yeah, I believe it's unnecessary language. I don't think it's something that adds any additional benefit to what we already have, so we have enough.
I can withdraw my,
Language already.
my motion. It's been explained.
Okay.
Mr. Dodd, I'd like to yield the floor. I'd like to make a motion that we require, as indicated in the SMAC report, that head coaches specifically are required to watch the NFHS NFHS COVID for coaches and administrators as a requirement prior to the start of the fall sports season.
So, yeah.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Otero, a second by Dr. McDaniel, to require coaches to watch the NFHS videos. Is there discussion on the motion? Yes, sir. Mr.
Just to be clear, that was head coaches?
I only specified
Yes,
head coaches.
head coaches, okay.
Head coaches. Yes, Mr. Finlayson.
Hey, just to make sure that, I believe I understand, but that is readily available on the NFHS educational site, just like all the other videos that they watch at this time. Okay?
No comment.
Thank you.
Is it just head coaches or head coaches and administrators?
The video specifies, the title of the video is COVID-19 for coaches and administrators. My motion was only emphasized on coaches, not administrators.
Okay, so.
And head coaches at that, correct?
I specified head coaches, being that it is now a requirement of all coaches. I would like to amend my motion to say that.
Okay.
And that would be consistent with what is required right now with heat illness, concussion, and sudden cardiac.
Okay. And say, okay, so the amended motion is for all coaches.
Correct.
To watch the NFHS videos. Yes, sir. Okay.
So just to be clear, so does this mean that every individual coach has to watch it and get the certificate? Does this mean that if I have a coaches meeting, we're all coaches, and I make them sit here and show it up here, and they sign a form that, yes, I watched it, will that suffice? Or is it each coach has to individually watch it and bring me a certificate? Because I've gotten different answers all over the years from staff. Maybe Mr. Toman can clarify that.
I was not listening, I'm sorry. I was in a sidebar over a technicality.
Or Justin can answer it if he knows.
Yes, he can.
I was also.
So, if this is going to be required,
Yes, sir.
and I'm having a coaches meeting and all of you are my coaches, and I bring the video up here, and as you leave, you sign a thing, I certify that I watched the COVID video, will that suffice? Or do they have to go on and watch it on their own and bring me a certificate that they watched it?
We have permitted for the students to watch it as a team or as a group. We have not done that for the adults.
So the answer to your question is they have to watch it on their own and print and get a certificate. Is that right, Mr. Harrison?
Yes, sir.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Dodd has the floor.
Oh, yes. Mr. Leva.
My question was along the same lines on the compliance of ensuring that each coach does that individually, and how we track that and monitor it. So I think my question was answered.
Okay.
Can we have it where, oh, go ahead.
Oh, Ms. Rohr?
My intent is that every coach is going to watch it, not in a group format. They would have to produce a certificate. That is the only way I would feel comfortable ensuring that my coaches have been made aware of what these recommendations are from the National Federation.
Would you be things of doing it under the guise under the athletic director either you watch it on your own or you do it.
Mr. Levy, you were next.
And these are for all the coaches participating in fall sports?
I am intending this for all coaches all year.
For the whole year?
Yes, but however, just like the concussion, the sudden cardiac, and the heat, they have to have it prior to the start of their season. So winter and spring would not have to do that until that season started.
Mr. Schusterman?
I just had one thought behind what Coach was talking about. If you were to do it in a group setting, you could really have discussion and really have exchanges and expect certain things. I'll be honest, I know coaches who kind of go home, turn it on, look away. But if they really have to do it the right way with an administrator there, if that's your intent, there could be some really good coaches. This is all going to be left up to how much people really care about it and put the effort in. Now, I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Harrison?
I would just say I would agree to the point that I think we do hear, or I personally hear, that a lot of coaches do watch it together, but they're in some sort of a lab. So I think you'd still have that ability to watch it together and get your each individual viewings in, but in the same room, then kind of follow up after that viewing. But that is an option I've heard. I just wanted to provide that follow along with what was said.
Mr. Curtis?
I've watched it, and it's not very long at all. In fact, it might be the shortest of all the ones that you watch as a coach. So I'm just going to be frank, it's not a huge deal to watch it.
No, it's not.
Any other discussion? And Ms. Otero, just to clarify your motion now, the requirement to watch the video by all the coaches, would that certificate be maintained at the school, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that would be, none of those certificates get sent to the FHSA office, or they're just confirmed, is that right?
Correct. The school submits an affidavit stating that their coaches will watch it. My question to Mr. Harrison is, if this motion is passed, what is the ability to amend that affidavit to include this video?
Well, at this time, we have all those. We can create a second one this year for this course alone.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Yes, sir.
Yes, for the individual districts or counties that opt out of the state series, will they still be required under the law or under FSHA to take this test, or how they coaches?
I would think so. Yes. Is that right, Mr. Arnold?
As a member school, they would be required to meet the same standards, whether they're in the state series, they're an independent school, or they're part of the state series.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Otero, as part of your thing, is this forever, or is this just 2021? Because we put it in there, and COVID goes away. Let's say, it disappears for whatever reason. Is your motion every year, or is this just going to be a 2021 thing?
I'm not putting an end date to the motion.
No,
It would be every year until the board deemed to change it. Okay. Any other questions? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Is there anyone opposed? I believe that's unanimous. Is that right, Mr. Tomlin? Was that a unanimous vote?
Yes.
Unanimous.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
16.
Very good. And I'll yield back the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Any other new business items? Seeing none, we will go to Executive Director comments.
Thank you. And there is value, great value, in in-person meetings, and I thank you for being here today. If I could go to the podium, please. Mr. Johns, would you and your wife please join me at the podium?
Thank you, Mr. Tomlin. I won't stay very long. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Who would ever known we'd be where we are right now? I'm glad that I'm not the president under these circumstances, and I appreciate the support everyone has given me while we were doing this, and I just appreciate everybody here. A lot of different opinions. When we leave out, we leave out as professionals, and I don't think anyone was here for any reason other than to try to make the best decisions they could for student athletes and kids, and whether we agree on those decisions or not, we take a beating sometimes in the media on either side of this fence, but the bottom line, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is, do we try to make the best decisions for kids, and I believe this board does that, and I just want to say thank you to Mr. Tomlin and especially the staff for all your support while I was acting as president. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Tomlin. At this time, we will move to board comments, and I will start with you, Mr. Johns.
I think I said everything already. I appreciate everybody's hard work and dedication to this situation, and I just pray that any decisions that are made by any of us are the right ones, and that our kids and our families are protected throughout this time, and we give kids opportunities and give parents opportunities to move forward, but obviously we need God's protection to make sure that we can make it through it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis.
I just want to echo Mr. Tomlin's comment that it was so nice to have an in-person meeting and see each and every one of you, and I look forward to us being able to do this again in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to all the board members for your dedication and commitment to safety and quality programs and to young people. That's what we're all about, and that's what we're here for. I especially want to say thank you to staff. I know they have worked overtime here lately in preparing, especially for this meeting, and I just want to say thank you very much for your efforts and your commitment. Safe travels to everybody on your way home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
I want to say thank you to all the board members. It's wonderful to actually look at each one of you. I know that this has been a difficult task, receiving all the emails that you've received. However, I think we have made a great decision, a wonderful decision, one that requires and will continue to require flexibility. I just hope and pray that we continue with flexibility in mind, that this is no correct one way to travel this road. We will only travel this road if we are flexible. I just hope and pray that all counties, coaches, parents, communities, I hope that we will keep that in mind, flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patrica.
Mr. Tomlin, this is still my favorite part of being a school board member, by the way, sitting on the FHSAA board. This was a tough decision for sure, but I'm grateful for everybody's feedback and input, and I think honesty through the process. I'm grateful for the community. When I say the community, I mean the larger community of Florida. I'm grateful for their participation in the process. They certainly were not afraid to give their opinions, and that was helpful. I feel like I've grown a little closer to the districts in the sections that I represent as a result of this. I reached out to as many of them as humanly possible, and I've developed those relationships through this. And finally, I look forward to getting to know our new board members when we can be more normal and interactive, because that's, the meal thing and all of that is the networking piece where I learn what's going on in your districts and bring those best practices back to where I work, and I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Finlayson.
Thank you. I also want to welcome our new board members in person for the first time, Mr. Thomas, Mr. McLean, and Dr. Longshore. We appreciate your service here with us. And for our very first meeting, welcoming number 11, Ben Hanks. We appreciate your presence here with us as well. I do want to go on the record to say that I do believe that Mary Lou Retton is a real gold medal winner. And then moving on from there, I want to thank I want to thank President Johns for all of his hard work and efforts over the time, and the staff, as somebody pointed out, all the work that they have done leading up, getting us ready to make a good decision, to have an informed decision. Thank you for all the work that took, and I want to thank Mr. Ochoa specifically for his passionate thinking about how we can possibly do everything we can to meet the needs of all member schools. I appreciate that very much. Along with that, I want to commend our board for the way in which we conducted business today. It was very positive. It was very professional. It was very passionate. But we worked together, and none of us are always going to be in agreement of what decisions are made. But it's been much easier in person. We just have to remember when we're not allowed to be in person, just the power of our comments, that we need to be careful that we don't do things that are going to be divisive and tear down our group as a whole. We just need to remember that we're all on the same team, and we love each other, and we support each other, and all of us, without a doubt, want what's best for not only the student athletes and families and schools, but this great association, which is the FHSAA. So thank you all for your time and dedication to that.
Thank you, Mr. Finlayson. Mr. McLean?
It's nice to be here in person again to meet everybody. We've made a decision, and we just got to hope and pray that schools and school districts and principals and coaches and parents make right decisions too, because it's going to take all of us. The old saying, you got to have everybody in to raise a child. So we're all concerned about safety. Okay? We've all, that's been the magic theme there, and we all agree that Florida's kind of unique in its geography and spread out from one end to the other. And so, but at least we have a date that we can move forward to, and I look forward to working with this group more. And you're getting old when I got Mr. Hanks in here, and I coached him in college one year when I was a GA at Florida, so I really feel old now. But thanks for welcoming me. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanks. Welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for accepting me and allowing me to be on a part of this prestigious board and the opportunity to serve District 3 and 4. Also, there's hope that we're on the right side of history, because we had to make a big decision here today, and I pray that we fall on the right side, so 20, 30 years from now, when there's a different group of gentlemen and young ladies in here, that they're able to say that that group made the great decision. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Oliva?
I too want to...
Can I interrupt and say he just referred to all of us ladies as young, so he's my new favorite.
Felt good about that.
So I too want to welcome the new board members and echo the sentiments that it's nice to be in person and face-to-face and engage in civil discourse and make sure that we are putting the right pieces in place to do what we can to support local decision-making, empower the people and administrators in their communities to implement what they know is best for their families and provide choice options for parents. And I think we got that right today. And I know we're going to continue this conversation and this dialogue, and we're going to get our schools reopened. We have 13 schools that have fully reopened, or school districts that have already opened this week, and a bunch more next week. And we're on the phone with them each and every single day, and together we're going to make the right decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, I want to
Start by welcoming all the new board members. Their first meeting was a daunting one, to say the least. Hopefully it gets better. But I will tell you this, from experience, having sat here now for 6 years, it is a continual learning experience. And I wouldn't trade it. I think you all walk away from this the same way. Secondly, I want to wish everyone well as we all embark in this new school year in our different districts. I hope that everyone stays safe. It's been great seeing everyone in person. And with that said, safe travels, and I hope to see everyone in September.
Thank you, Dr. McDaniel.
There's saying anybody can lead when the wind's blowing at your back, and that means that it's time for us to lead when it's blowing in your face. And so I think this board, over the last several months, with board leadership and executive director leadership, came to what is probably an imperfect decision, but it's a decision that gives guidelines for folks. So I commend everybody in this room, staff, board, for doing that. So now we have to all go back home. I think it's been said a few times, but now it's up to us. I just texted my AD. We better do it right. So we better get our act together, follow our protocols, and keep kids safe. Because sports is important, but safety is the most. So we're going to go back home and do it right. So that's my comment. Safe travels home.
Thank you, Mr. Schusterman.
I too want to welcome the new members. It's a great organization to be part of. I do know we made some very difficult decisions today. We all weren't on the same page, but we had healthy discussion. And moving forward, I pray that the decisions we made today are ones that will make us look good in the future. That for the safety of the kids, for the safety of everything involved in what we do. I'll pray for that every day. I want to really commend the staff. All the work they've done all summer in creating all these things are really, people have no idea how hard they worked and how they had to do it remote and communicate and so on. And I really want to thank them for their hard work. I mean, behind the scenes, people out in the public world have no idea how hard they work, and they make so many things go. Everybody be safe, have safe travels, and like Doctor just said, it's when we get home making sure our schools are all doing it the right way. And we're going to have to be pretty hard on these people at times, because that's the whole key. It can be done if it's done right. Take care, travel safely. Thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent Longshore?
Yes, I'd like to thank everyone for their warm welcomes. It's wonderful to be part of this board, and I really look forward to our work together. I want to thank you for the work that you've done today. I can tell you from superintendents across this state, flexibility was their desire. And I think you've done just that today. We've been given flexibility on our start dates. Some have already started. Highlands will start on Monday, and I can't wait to see those students come in the doors. And what we've accomplished today, I think, gives great flexibility to superintendents to do their jobs well. So thank you for the decisions that you've made today, and thank you for your welcome to the board.
Thank you. Mr. Toro?
When I got in the car this morning, I had some apprehension about how this meeting was going to go, but I was also extremely excited to be leaving the county and coming to a different county. So it's been nice to be here in person instead of in a little bitty box. And then, of course, you see news reports and you see pictures of those boxes and you go, oh, it looks so horrible. So, yeah, it's been nice. You know, summer is supposed to be a time of restoring ourselves and vacations. And yes, we still work, but it's supposed to be, you know, getting ready for the school year. And it tends to go by very quickly. This one dragged. I don't know about the rest of you, but it felt like it was forever. And I can't wait until these kids come back. But I also have to say welcome to the new folks. You guys got thrown into the fire really fast. And you're still here. and that's good. We're glad you came back today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And staff, I don't know how much sleep you guys have had over the last few months, but thank you for all the hard work you did. I think, we're not going to please everybody. We know that. We knew that coming in. But I think we did a really good thing today in at least giving some people some hope and a start date, something that they can say, okay, this is what we're doing. And for that, I am very, very grateful and feel good about going back to get things going. So safe travels to everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd.
Yes. Yes, I too want to welcome our new board members and just tell you how much we value your input. And as a part of this team, we've had some good discussion here today, and we're going to continue that. And I just want to welcome you all aboard. It is this uncharted territory, but we've made some decisions today. We've put some things forth, and we've given parents options. I know we've given school districts options, and I too agree that it's going to be up to the school districts to do it right and to focus on safety. That's our focus, is safety. But we're giving options. I want to thank Mr. Tomlin and all the meetings that went on with all the advisory committees. We kind of gave some marching orders to get more information and bring things back to this board. And I'm very comfortable with that process and with what took place. And, I appreciate the work of the SMAC committee and the dedication that they have. And I know county school districts and private schools are going to be looking at that SMAC report, and they have the option to follow that to a T or to use it to the best for their community. So I think we made a good decision, and it's a pleasure to serve on this board.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Thank you all, to each of you, for being here, as I stated. And a year ago, when you all elected me president-elect, I never set out to break the record of 5 meetings before the first scheduled meeting. So we're not trying to set any records here. So I appreciate everyone coming together and all those meetings and the work that Mr. Tomlin and your staff did to make the arrangements for that and the arrangements today. I do want to give a sincere gratitude to Dr. Maynard. She is not on the call right now, but she stayed with us for about 3 hours. So I appreciate her rearranging her schedule to make her availability to us so that we could ask her questions. We had to make a difficult decision today. It didn't matter what that outcome was of the decision. There were going to be people that were upset, and there were going to be people that were very pleased. So as we move forward, we are all together as one now, and the goal is that we are making the safest decisions in our schools and our districts, and our schools have a lot ahead of them, not only starting school, but also implementing sports in the safest way possible. So I sincerely express my thoughts and prayers to them in making the best decisions that they can make for the students that they serve. Thank you to Mr. Tomlin for making this meeting available to the public. I thought it was very important that they see it and hear our decisions. When it comes out in the news, I think they needed to hear how we came about. And we had some great discussion, and we had some great dialogue back and forth. And it was always appreciated to hear opposite sides of how one person may think. And that's what goes into making the best decision. I wish each of you all well in your individual schools and districts. Everyone in here, safe well-being, stay healthy. We wish you the best, and we will see you hopefully in September at the earliest. What is that? The 20th, I think? Whatever the date is in September, we will see you in person in our next meeting. Travel safe, and that adjourns our meeting at this time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.